Dan Keir opened his eyes and didn't recognize anything. Not the ceiling, not the smell, not even his own hands. His fingers were thin and stiff with calluses. His mouth tasted of iron and something sour. His head was splitting as if someone had driven a nail into the back of his skull and forgotten to pull it out. He was lying on the dirt floor in a hut that smelled of smoke and rotten straw. Gray morning light streamed through cracks in the wall. Dan sat up. The world swayed. He looked at his hands again. They weren't his, thin, with scraped raw knuckles. He tried to remember what had happened before that and hit a wall. Darkness, a flash, and a single phrase that was stuck in his throat like a shard of glass. Let's start with what unites us. He didn't know who he'd said that to. He didn't remember why, but he remembered that he hadn't finished speaking. And then the door of the hut swung open, and a burly, bearded man stepped inside, a rope in his hands. The man grabbed Dan by the collar and dragged him outside like a sack of flour. Dan didn't resist. Not because he didn't want to. His body simply wouldn't obey. His legs were tangled. His muscles felt like a wet rag. The man threw him to his knees in the middle of the village square and said something to the crowd. Dan didn't understand a word. The language was foreign, guttural, harsh, but he could read everything he needed to from their faces. Contempt, relief, joy that someone else would be sent to the slaughter. The crowd looked at him as if he were livestock being led to the pit. An old man in a leather apron stepped forward. He spat at Dan's feet. He said something brief. The crowd burst into laughter. Dan didn't know exactly what he'd said, but he understood the tone. Something like, "At least the useless one is good for something." Two guys grabbed him by the arms and dragged him up the trail. The trail led through the forest to a clearing on a hill. Dan counted his steps. 17, 43, 112. Counting helped him not to think about the fact that this body wasn't his and that he couldn't remember his name. Or rather, he remembered two names. One sounded right but didn't belong to this body. The second belonged to the body but sounded like a stranger's boot on a stranger's foot. They were already waiting in the clearing. Dan saw a second crowd. These were different. Completely different. Silvery fur on their forearms, yellow eyes, fangs protruding from beneath their upper lips, ears elongated and mobile like those of beasts. They stood in a semicircle and growled, not loudly, steadily, like an idling engine. Dan realized that this growling was their silence, their way of waiting. Between the two crowds stood a post with a rope made of coarse oxhide tied to it. Dan was led to the post. His left hand was tied to it, the rope cut into his wrist. He looked to his right and saw her. She was standing 3 steps away, young, thin. Silvery fur ran from her wrists to her elbows. Her eyes were like 2 molten coins, yellow, with a black dot for a pupil. She stared at him without blinking, not as if he were a human being, as if he were a problem to be solved quickly, and preferably with her teeth. She too was tied to the post by her right hand. A rope connected them. Dan looked at the knot, a wedding knot. Somehow, he knew it was a wedding knot. The knowledge just surfaced on its own, not his, the body's. The memory of its former owner was seeping out drop by drop. A name, Dan Keir, 23 years old, son of a drunkard. His mother died in childbirth. Nickname in the village, Poltorashka, because he was skinny. He owed the village headman for last year's salt. No friends, no relatives, no dog. The most useless person in the village, the perfect victim. An old man in a leather apron stepped out from among the crowds. He began to speak. His voice was loud and solemn. Dan didn't understand the words, but he felt the rhythm. It was an oath, ancient, memorized. From the side of the beast people, a huge gray wolf stepped forward, upright, with battle scars all over its muzzle. It growled in response. A different language, a different rhythm, but the same structure, an oath against an oath. Both crowds listened only to their own side. No one understood the others, and that was the whole plan. Dan saw it clearly. Each side could put anything they wanted into the oath. An insult, a curse, a condition. No one would verify it. Both sides were already expecting a trick, so they could grab their weapons.
The warriors on both sides already had their hands on their hilt, and then a sound rang out behind Dan's head. Quiet, clear, like a silver bell in the wind. Ding! Letters appeared before his eyes. Transparent, glowing, visible only to him. The language of the heart system has been activated. A bearer of the gift of translation has been detected. Activation condition: voluntary consent to connect with a being of another race. Condition met. Note: coerced consent counts as consent. Yeah, we know that's debatable. Dan blinked. The letters didn't disappear. He blinked again. They grew brighter. And at that moment, the world changed. The old man's words ceased to be mere noise. They took on form, meaning, color. Dan heard what the old man was saying. We'll throw this worthless bastard into the beast's jaws. Let his blood become fertilizer for a world that will never be. And at the same time, a second line appeared above the old man's head. Semi-transparent. In italics. Subtext: if this pup dares to speak of my reports, I'll personally slit his throat before dawn. Dan shifted his gaze to the gray wolf. The wolf was growling its part of the oath. And Dan understood every word. We're handing over this female with rotten blood. Half-wolf. The pack's disgrace. Let a human devour her, just as humans devour everything they see. The subtext hanging over the wolf was different. I'm sorry, girl.
I'm truly sorry, but the pack has decided. Dan felt something hot rising from his stomach to his throat. Not anger, not fear, recognition. He'd seen this before. Not here, somewhere. In another life he couldn't quite remember. Two peoples, two crowds, two languages, one hatred. And in the middle, two who were sent to their deaths because no one pitied them. He knew what to do. He didn't understand where it came from, but he knew. Dan took a deep breath. He opened his mouth, and he spoke. In two languages at once, human and wolf, the exact same phrase. We are handing these two over because we are afraid to admit that we are tired of hating. His voice was hoarse, quiet, but the clearing heard him. Both crowds, at the same time, each in its own language. Silence fell like an axe blow. For 10 seconds, no one moved. The old man in the apron turned pale. The gray-haired wolf stopped growling and slowly turned his head toward Dan. His eyes narrowed. Not hostile, surprised. On the human side, someone dropped a spear. On the beastmen's side, a young she-wolf flattened her ears. Dan stood tied to a post, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding wildly. Ding! +3 points. Language unlocked. Basic wolf. 2 out of 144 languages mastered. And next to him, his newlywed wife turned her head for the first time. Not like a predator toward its prey, like a creature that had heard something impossible and was trying to figure out if it had misheard. Lyra's trust scale, 0, 7. The ceremony ended in silence. No one threw a single stone or bone. The crowds dispersed. Silently. For the first time in 7 generations, the wedding rite in this clearing did not end in bloodshed. Dana and Lyra were untied from the post. They were directed toward the path leading to the top of the hill. There stood a house. If you could call it a house. 4 walls of rough-hewn stone. A thatched roof. 1 room. 1 hearth. 1 sleeping platform. For 2. Dan went in first. He looked around. The floor was dirt. There was only 1 window and it was small. The door didn't lock. He turned to Lyra. She was standing in the doorway. She didn't come in. She looked at him with those same melting eyes. Then she stepped over the threshold. She came in. She sat down in the far corner, her back to the wall, facing both the door and Dan at the same time. She pulled a knife from somewhere. A knife from somewhere under her clothes. She placed it on her lap and closed her eyes. She didn't fall asleep, she just closed them. She signaled that the conversation was over. Dan sat down against the opposite wall. 3 meters of dirty floor lay between them. 3 meters and 200 years of hatred. He closed his eyes too. A system prompt flickered quietly in his mind. Lyra's trust scale, 7 out of 100. Day 1. 364 days until the end of the term. Faces floated before his eyes. A crowd, an old man, a gray-haired wolf. Molten golden eyes staring back at him. And from somewhere, deep within, a memory that didn't belong to this body, a thought surfaced.
I've seen this before. Two peoples, one border, one hatred. I know how this ends if no one intervenes. He didn't fall asleep until dawn. Neither did she. Dawn broke gray and cold. Dan opened his eyes, and the first thing he saw was an empty corner. Lyra was gone. The knife had disappeared too. He stood up. His body ached as if he'd been beaten. This guy's muscles were weak and malnourished. Dan stepped outside. The hill lay fully before him.
On one side, down below, lay Maple Hollow, the humans' village, smoke rising from chimneys, the crowing of roosters, a fence of sharpened stakes. On the other side, beyond the Silver River, Bone River, a dark forest began, the territory of the packs. Not a sound came from there, but Dan sensed that there were eyes behind the trees. Between the village and the forest stood a hill. His hill, neutral ground. He looked down and saw Lyra. She was crouching by the stream, 30 paces from the house, drinking water, not with her hands, leaning her face into the water, like an animal. Then she raised her head. Water dripped from her chin. She looked up at Dan. Her eyes were wary, not angry, just wary, like a creature accustomed to the idea that any movement nearby meant danger. Dan raised both hands, palms forward, slowly. A universal gesture. I'm unarmed. Lyra looked at him for 3 seconds. Then she turned away and leaned over the water again. No conversation took place. Dan went back inside. He surveyed what he had: a hearth with no firewood, a cracked pot, a sack with a handful of grain, a knife, just one, dull. The rope they'd been tied with yesterday, a wedding rope made of oxhide. He took it in his hands, sturdy, long. It would come in handy. He went outside again and began gathering kindling. His body wouldn't obey him well. Dan Kerr, son of a drunkard, had weak hands. His back ached after a night on the dirt floor. But Dan worked. He gathered an armful. He returned. He lit a fire. It took a long time. He found a flint in the corner of the house. The tinder was damp. Dan blew on the sparks until his head spun. When the fire finally caught, he felt a small victory, his first in this world. He poured the grits into a pot of water from the stream. The porridge turned out watery and tasteless. He poured half into a wooden bowl and set it by the doorway for Lyra. Then he sat down by the fire and began to eat his share. The porridge was disgusting, but it was hot. The warmth spread through his stomach, and for the first time in a day, Dan felt capable of thinking. He began to remember. Not Dan Kerr's life. His own. Pieces. Fragments. A long table. Headphones. A microphone. 2 voices in his ears at once. His hands racing across the keyboard. Translator. He was a translator. A word surfaced from somewhere. Simultaneous interpreter. He didn't translate books. He translated people. Living people. Angry people. Frightened people. In places where gunfire rang out, his memory spat out images in no particular order. A dusty road. A bus with a shattered window. Children in the back seats. A man with an automatic rifle at the driver's door. And him, Daniel, between them. He translates. Not words, meanings. The man with the automatic rifle shouts that he'll kill everyone. Daniel translates for the bus driver, but he doesn't translate literally. He translates so the driver won't panic, so the children won't scream, so that everyone would stay alive. He lied. He rephrased the threat, turned it into a demand into a request into a joke. The bus drove off. The children survived, and he stood on the dusty road and thought, was that the right thing to do or not?
I lied to save them, but I lied. His memory cut off. The next fragment was shorter. A room, a table, a window, 2 people across from him. He opens his mouth. Let's start with what unites us. And the darkness. That's all. Dan set down his bowl. He looked at the system bar that was quietly flickering in the corner of his vision. Language of the heart. Layer 1. Speech.
2 out of 144 languages mastered. Layer 2, subtext, active. Layer 3, resonance, active. Restriction. The gift works only when the bearer speaks the truth. 1 lie. The system shuts down for 24 hours. A translator who lies is war. We don't start wars. Dan smirked. His past life had been built on the idea that sometimes lies save lives. His new gift demanded the opposite. The truth. Always. Only the truth. In a world where the truth kills faster than a sword. He heard footsteps, light, almost silent. Lyra entered the house. She looked at the bowl by the threshold. She looked at Dan. The subtext above her head glowed a soft silver. She said, "Why?" Subtext, "No one feeds someone they're about to kill. You poisoned this." Dan looked her in the eyes. "Because I got 2 servings, and I only have 1 mouth." He couldn't see the subtext above his own head. But the system was fair. If he'd lied, she would have gone dark. She didn't go dark. Lyra looked at him for a long time. Then she sat down on the floor. She picked up the bowl. She sniffed it. The subtext above her head changed. "It's not poisoned. It smells like food. Bad food." But food. She started eating, quickly, greedily, like a creature accustomed to having its food taken away at any moment. She finished in 30 seconds. She set the bowl on the floor, and for the first time, she spoke a long sentence in Wolf. Dan understood every word. "You spoke the language of the pack yesterday. How do you know it? Humans don't know our language." The subtext. "If you're a spy, I'll kill you right now. If not, then I don't understand what's going on, and that scares me more than a spy." Dan chose the truth. "I didn't know your language yesterday morning. I learned it last night, in a single second. I don't understand how, but I'm not lying. Check." Lyra tilted her head. Her nostrils flared. She was sniffing him. Dan knew that wolves could smell a lie. Sweat, adrenaline, microscopic changes in body chemistry. A living lie detector sat across from him, scanning every molecule of his being. Lyra sat up straight. Subtext. "He's not lying. He doesn't smell like a lie. He smells like fear. But it's an honest fear," she said aloud. "You're a strange person." Subtext. "Strange doesn't mean dangerous." For now. Lyra's trust scale. 7, 9. Dan nodded. "I've been told that before." And that, too, was true. The rest of the morning passed in silence, but it was a different kind of silence, not hostile, cautious. 2 beings sat in the same house and were learning not to fear each other, slowly, millimeter by. Around noon, Dan went out to survey the hill. The area was small, a house, a stream, a clearing, 3 trees. The slopes led down to the village on one side and to the forest on the other. On the northern slope, Dan found some old garden beds. Overgrown, but the soil was good. Someone had lived here before, perhaps past couples from the blood weddings, the ones who didn't survive. Dan returned and began clearing the garden beds, with his bare hands, a dull knife. The work was hard and mindless, and that was precisely why it was perfect. His hands worked, his mind thought. He thought about the system, about the subtext, about what he had seen above the heads of the village elder and the chieftain yesterday. The system revealed more than just thoughts. It revealed the difference between words and intentions. It was more powerful than any weapon. In his past life, the one he was beginning to remember, for 20 years, he'd learned to read between the lines, to catch pauses, to notice when a person touched their nose, when they looked away, when their voice rose by half a tone. Now the system did it for him, instantly, unerringly, with subtitles. But there was a limit. The truth. Only the truth. 1 lie and 24 hours of blindness. In a world where everyone lies, where a lie is currency, a shield, and a sword all at once, he had to survive on the bare truth.
Dan smirked and continued digging. By evening, half the garden beds had been cleared. His hands were stiff, his back wouldn't straighten, but inside there was something resembling a plan. Not a finished one, a rough draft, blurry, but he could see the direction. He needed to hold out for a year on this hill. He needed to stay alive. He had to avoid being killed. He had to prevent Lyra from being killed. And somehow he had to make sure the two villages below didn't slaughter each other when the time came to pay the tax. 30 days. That was exactly how long remained until the harvest tax collection. He knew this from the memories of the body's former owner.
Every year the village handed over grain to the Baron. Every year there wasn't enough grain. Every year the village made up the shortfall by raiding the beastmen, and the beastmen paid their tribute in pelts, and they made up their shortfall by raiding humans. A vicious cycle. 200 years, and Dan sat right in the middle of that circle on a hill between two campfires. He returned to the house. Lyra was sitting in her corner. A dead rabbit lay in front of her. Fresh. She'd caught it while Dan was digging. With her teeth. No trap. Dan looked at the rabbit, looked at Lyra. "I can cook it over the fire, if you'll share." The subtext hanging over her, he wants to share the food. For the second time today. Is this either a trap, or he really is that strange? Lyra kicked the rabbit toward him. She didn't say anything. Dan skinned the carcass. With a dull knife, slowly and crookedly, Lyra watched. The subtext, he doesn't know how to do this. Not at all. How did he survive until he was 23? Dan skewered the meat on a stick and hung it over the fire. The smell filled the house. They ate in silence. On the third morning, Dan woke up to the sound of footsteps outside. Quick. A child's. He opened his eyes. Lyra was already standing by the door, a knife in her hand, her ears pressed against the door. She'd heard it first. The door swung open. Standing on the threshold was a boy of about 10, dirty, barefoot, out of breath. He rattled off something in the human language of Maple Hollow. The system translated instantly. "The village headman wants you in the village. Right now. He said if you don't come by noon, he'll send people." The subtext behind the boy's words was simple and childlike. "I'm scared. There's a she-wolf here. Please let me go as soon as possible." Dan nodded. "Tell him I'll be there." The boy turned and ran down the slope without looking back. Lyra put away her knife. She looked at Dan. Subtext, "If you go alone, you won't come back. They'll kill you and say I did it." Dan looked at her. "You think they'll kill me?" Lyra didn't answer out loud. The subtext answered for her. "I think you're getting in their way. And whatever gets in their way, they kill. It's that simple." Dan nodded. "Then let's go together." Lyra took a step back. The subtext stank. "He wants to bring a she-wolf into a human village. He's crazy. Or very smart." She said aloud. "They'll shoot," Dan replied. "They won't. It's dangerous to shoot with you nearby. They'll miss and hit their own people, and they'll be afraid to get close. You're my shield." The subtext flashed above him, and Dan knew that Lyra couldn't read it, but could sense the truth. He wasn't lying. He truly believed it was safer with the she-wolf by his side than without her. Lyra looked at him for 5 seconds. Then she stepped out through the door first. That was her consent.
They walked down the hill together. Dan led the way. Lyra was 3 steps behind. She moved silently. Dan could hear only his own footsteps. As they approached the village, he saw a crowd, about 30 people, all at the gate, hands on their weapons, eyes full of malice. Half fear, half anger. They weren't looking at Dan. They were looking at Lyra. Dan stopped 10 steps from the gate, no closer, no farther. A distance where conversation was possible, but an attack was not. An old man in a leather apron stepped forward, Gareth Mollett, the village elder of Maple Valley. He began to speak, loudly, to the crowd. The system translated both the subtext and the words simultaneously.
The words, "You brought that creature to our gates. You are a traitor. You're sullying our blood. You've made a pact with the enemy." Subtext, "Shut him up fast. If he starts talking like he did at the wedding, people will start listening. And if people start listening, they'll ask about the reports. They'll ask where the 17 guys have gone over the last 3 years. They'll ask why they were listed as casualties from beasts, when in reality they were sold as mercenaries to the Baron for 2 silver pieces a head." Dan felt a chill run down his spine. 17 guys, sold, 2 silver pieces a head. The system laid the subtext of the village head was as clear as day. And Dan realized this wasn't just a village squabble. It was the slave trade. Gareth kept shouting. The crowd joined in. Individual voices hurled insults. A stone whizzed past Dan's ear. He didn't flinch. He stood there. He watched. He read between the lines. Above the head of the woman in the front row, "My son went hunting 3 years ago and never came back. The village head said wolves killed him." Above the head of the old blacksmith, "Gareth owes me for horseshoes. He says he has no money, but yesterday his wife was wearing a new necklace." Above the head of the young man with a drink, "I'm scared. I don't want to fight. But if I don't shout along with the others, they'll call me a coward." Dan could see right through the whole village. Every fear, every lie, every secret pain. And standing in the middle of it all was Gareth, shouting about betrayal to drown out his own crimes. Dan waited until Gareth took a pause to catch his breath. Then he spoke, quietly. But the square was so silent with tension that everyone heard him. "Gareth Hammer, you say I'm a traitor. You say I've sullied the village's blood. But I want to ask you something. Where have the 17 young men gone over the past 3 years? Gareth froze. The color drained from his face. Dan continued. "You listed them as missing, killed by beastmen, but their mothers still haven't seen their bodies. Not a single body in 3 years. 17 young men and not a single body." The crowd stirred. The woman in the front row, the very one whose subtext Dan had seen, clutched her neighbor's arm. Her lips trembled. Dan wasn't looking at Gareth. He was looking at the crowd. "I don't know where they went." That was a half-truth. He knew from the subtext, but he couldn't prove it. And the system hadn't shut down because he really didn't know for sure. Subtext isn't proof. It's a hint. And Dan used it as leverage, not an accusation, a question. "I'm just asking, where are the bodies?" Gareth opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. His subtext was all over the place. He knows. How does he know? Who told him? Cassian. No, Cassian doesn't know the details. Who then? He's bluffing. He's bluffing. But what if I say that out loud and he isn't bluffing? Gareth did the only thing he could. He yelled. "He's crazy! That creature from across the river has clouded his mind! Don't listen to him!" But the crowd was already listening, not to Dan, but to the silence that followed his words. 17 names hung in the air. 17 mothers who never received their children's bodies. Dan turned around. He walked back toward the hill.
Lyra followed him, silently. No one threw any more stones. Clink. +8 points. Trust scale. Population of Maple Valley. Total. 3. 11. It wasn't much, but the seeds had been planted. They returned to the hill.
Lyra went into the house and sat in her corner. Dan sat by the hearth. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline. He had just challenged the village elder in his own square, using information he'd received from the translucent letters above a stranger's head. Information that couldn't be presented as evidence, couldn't be written down, couldn't be shown to others. Only he could see it. Lyra spoke. "You see what others don't see." Dan turned to her. She looked at him calmly, without fear, with something new in her eyes. "You see what they're hiding behind their words." Dan nodded. "Yes." Lyra paused. Then she said, "In our pack, we call people like that the seer-through. The last one was 100 years ago. He was killed by his own kind." Implied meaning, because no one wants anyone to see their truth. Lyra's trust scale, 11, 15, +4. She gave him the information voluntarily. Warning, be careful with this gift. Those who see the truth don't live long. Dan looked at her. "I know." Subtext, "I've already failed to survive once. The system didn't shut down." The truth. That evening, Dan sat by the fire and thought. He pulled 3 facts from Gareth's subtext. 17 guys sold, 2 silver coins per head, and a name, the Baron. Gareth worked for the Baron. He sold people to him, and the war with the Beastmen was a cover, a convenient explanation for the mothers. "Your son died in battle. Here's his medallion. There's no body. The beasts devoured it. 200 years of hatred, and beneath it, like worms under a rock, are those who profit from it." Dan pulled a coal from the hearth. He found a flat stone. He began to draw, not a map, a diagram. Gareth, an upward arrow. The Baron, an upward arrow. A question mark. 3 levels, at least. He was a translator. He knew how conflict zones worked. There's always someone who shoots, someone who pays for the bullets, and someone who sells the land after the shooting stops. 3 levels, sometimes 4. Lyra walked over. She looked at the diagram. She didn't say anything, but her unspoken meaning spoke volumes. He's thinking, that's good. Those who think are more dangerous than those who bite. She lay down on her half of the cot, with her back to him, a knife in her hand, but closer than yesterday, a palm's length closer. Dan erased the diagram. He lay down. He closed his eyes. 27 days until the tax, a ticking timer in his head. And one question, how to make 2 villages see a common enemy when for 200 years they'd seen only each other as the enemy. That night, he dreamed of a bus, children in the back seats, a man with an automatic rifle, and his own voice, lying to save the truth. He woke up in a sweat. The system flickered quietly. A reminder, a translator who lies, that's war. He lay in the dark and listened to Lyra growling in her sleep, quietly, pitifully, like a puppy in a trap. On the 4th day, a girl arrived. Dan noticed her scent before he saw her. Not him, Lyra. She lifted her head from the bowl of morning porridge. Her nostrils flared. Her ears twitched. Someone's coming. Small, hungry, smells like a fox and a human at the same time. Dan stepped outside. No one was there, but Lyra pointed her chin toward the bushes by the stream. There. Dan walked over. A girl was sitting in the bushes. She looked about 14 or maybe 15, but she was small and skinny, like a 10-year-old. Her red hair was tangled into a nest, sharp fox ears sticking out of that nest. A tail, red, mangy, tucked between her legs. Her eyes were huge, green, frightened. In her hands, she held half of the flatbread she'd stolen from the doorstep, the one Dan had left out for the morning. The system revealed its subtext. Caught. They're going to beat her now. Or worse, run. No, the flatbread. Don't throw away the flatbread. She hadn't eaten in 3 days. Don't drop it. Dan crouched down, slowly, without reaching out his hands, without blocking her path to escape. A lesson from a past life. That's how you sit in front of frightened children at checkpoints. You're not a guest. You're not a thief. You live here. If you want to. The girl froze. Subtext. What? What did he say? You live here. That word. Live. Somewhere. Not in the woods. Not under a bridge. Not in a hole. Live. The flatbread fell from her hands. The girl looked at him with huge green eyes, her lips trembling. Dan didn't move. He waited. Lyra stepped out to the threshold. She looked at the girl. She sniffed the air.
Subtext: half-breed, fox and human, neither, just like me, just like me. Lyra turned away and went back into the house, but she left the door open. It was an invitation.
In wolf body language, an open door means, you can come in, and I won't hurt you. The girl picked up the flatbread. She stood up. She went inside. She sat down in the corner, the one farthest away from everyone. She began to eat, quickly, choking, like a little animal. Dan followed her in. He set a bowl of leftover porridge in front of her, a mug of water. He sat down by the hearth. He didn't look at her. He gave her space. She finished eating, finished drinking, and she said, in a voice that was at once childlike and old, "My name is Yuna." The system translated the name. Yuna Kim, 17 years old, not 14. Hunger and 3 years in the woods had stolen her youth. Subtext: if he kicks me out, I'll leave. I'm used to it. Everyone kicks me out. People because of my ears. Foxes because of my face. I belong to no one. That's normal. Dan looked at Lyra. Lyra was lying in her corner, pretending to sleep, but one ear was turned toward Yuna. Subtext: no one's, just like me. Yuna's trust scale, 30, starting point. She decided right away that Dan was one of her own,
because he was the only one in her life who'd said stay instead of get lost. By evening, Yuna had scouted the entire hill. She moved quickly, silently. She peered into every crevice. She found a burrow with rabbits on the southern slope. She found a bush with berries that Dan had thought were poisonous but turned out to be edible. She found a secret path through the ravine that would let them bypass the village and come out onto the trade route. In 2 hours, she learned more about the hill than Dan had in 3 days. By evening, she announced that she was now the chief scout. Dan didn't argue. Lyra snorted. Subtext: a puppy, but a fast one. That night, Yuna curled up by the hearth. She wrapped her tail around her legs. She fell asleep instantly. For the first time in 3 years, not on the ground, not in the rain, not alone. Dan covered her with a blanket, one he didn't have to spare. He gave her his own. Lyra noticed. Subtext: he gave her the blanket, his own, to her. Stupid. She'll freeze. But stupid and Lyra's trust scale, 15, 18. On the morning of the 5th day, Dan woke up to a scream. Not human, animal, high-pitched, full of pain. The scream came from the eastern slope. Yuna was already standing by the door, ears pinned back, tail bristling. Lyra was outside. Dan stepped out. On the slope, among the blackberry bushes, lay a she-wolf, young, a teenager. Her gray fur was covered in blood. Her leg was caught in a trap. A steel one, a human one, with the Maple Hollow brand on the shackle. The she-wolf was whimpering. An adult she-wolf stood nearby, her mother. She was growling, not at Dan, into the void, at the sky, out of helplessness. The system translated the growl. My girl, my little one, help, anyone. Lyra stood to the side. Her face was stony. The subtext: the Red Glade family. My pack banished them 3 winters ago. I'm not allowed to go near them. But she's small. She's small and she's in pain. Dan dropped to his knees next to the trap. The trap was tight. Dan's hands were weak. He pulled on the spring but couldn't release it. Yuna rushed to help. Together, they leaned on it. The spring gave a centimeter. More. More. The trap's jaws opened. The teenage she-wolf pulled her paw free. The whimpering grew quieter. The mother rushed to her daughter. She sniffed her. She licked the wound. She turned to Dan.
Her eyes were wet. The system translated, human, you're a human. Why? The subtext, humans set traps. Humans don't remove them. What are you? Dan looked at the wound. It was deep. The bone wasn't broken, but the soft tissue was torn. He needed a healer.
He has no herbs, no ointments, nothing, but there are some in the village below. And there's one woman who didn't spit in his face at the wedding. May he so. The herbalist. Dan turned to Una. Do you know where the herbalist lives in Maple Hollow? Una nodded. The house by the south gate, with herbs on the... Dan looked at her. Bring her here. Tell her there's a wounded child on the hill. Don't say which one. Una vanished, instantly, as if she'd dissolved into the bushes. Dan sat down next to the mother wolf. She growled, quietly, warningly. Don't come any closer. Dan didn't come closer. He sat. He waited. He spoke. In wolf. Slowly. Basic level. She'll live. Help is on the way. The mother looked at him. The subtext shifted. Distrust. Caution. A shadow of something resembling hope. Trust scale. The mother wolf. 0. 4. 40 minutes passed. Una returned. Behind her walked a young woman carrying a basket of herbs.
May he so, 19 years old, quiet, dark hair tied in a bun, attentive eyes, hands stained green from the herbs. She climbed the hill and saw the scene. A man, 2 female wolves, one of whom was a teenager, covered in blood, and a red-haired fox half-breed. May he stopped. The basket nearly slipped from her hands. The implication, beast people, here, nearby, my brother, they killed my brother, 5 years ago, he went hunting and, no, stop, it's a child, it's a wounded child, it's not. Dan saw 2 waves colliding in her mind, the hatred she'd learned over 5 years and the instinct of a healer who couldn't walk past the wounded. He didn't try to talk her out of it, he didn't try to explain, he simply translated the she-wolf's words, word for word. My daughter has been caught in a trap. She's in pain. Please. May he looked at the she-wolf. Her hands were shaking. Then she dropped to her knees. She opened the basket. She took out some ointment, a bandage, herbal decoction. She got to work. Her hands stopped trembling the very second they touched the wound. A professional.
The body knows what to do, even when the mind is screaming, run. The mother wolf watched as the human woman treated her cub, silently. The underlying meaning shifted every second. Distrust, surprise, something which wolves have no word, something like gratitude, but deeper. May he finished. She bandaged the wound. She poured the decoction into the cub's mouth. The teenage she-wolf fell asleep. The pain was gone. May he sat down on the ground. Her hands were trembling again. The mother wolf turned toward her and spoke, in wolf, slowly, struggling to form the sounds. May he didn't understand. She heard a growl. She looked at Dan. Dan translated. She's saying, you brought my child back to me. She doesn't know how to repay this debt, except by living. May he pressed her palm to her mouth. Her eyes welled up. The subtext, my brother hated them. My brother killed them. And she's thanking me. For her child, whom my brother. May he began to cry, quietly, soundlessly, like someone who had forgotten how to cry and was remembering how to do it. The mother wolf leaned toward her. She touched her temple with her nose. It was a wolf's gesture. Dan knew it from the basic vocabulary. I acknowledge you. You are not an enemy. D's in. Plus 25 points. Mayhe's trust scale. 0. 38. A spike. Sudden, emotional, but real. That evening, for the first time, 5 of them sat at the same table. Dan, Lyra, Una, Mayhe, and the mother wolf, who refused to leave until her daughter woke up. The table was a stone by the hearth. The food was thin porridge and a couple of rabbits that Lyra had caught that day. But they sat there, together. A human, a she-wolf, a half-fox, a herbalist who, 4 hours ago, had been trembling with fear of the beast people, and a mother whose child slept, bandaged, by the fire. No one spoke. Una was the first to break the silence. She said the porridge was disgusting and that tomorrow she'd find mushrooms and they'd have a proper meal.
Lyra snorted. Mayhee smiled, with the corners of her lips. For the first time that evening, the Wolf Mother looked at Dan. The subtext, "You're a strange person. Everyone says so." Ding! System. Word of the day available. Dan blinked. A new line. Layer 4 activated. Once a day, the system generates a single phrase.
If said to the right person at the right moment, it cuts a conflict in half. Today's phrase, that melody you remember. It wasn't just your mother who sang it. Dan didn't understand. He looked at the phrase. He looked at the people at the table. To whom? The system didn't say. He had to figure it out for himself. That night, the mother wolf took her daughter and left. Quietly. Without saying goodbye. The wolf way. To leave is to return. To say goodbye means never again. Mayhee stayed. She said she'd spend the night and leave in the morning. But Dan saw the subtext. I don't want to go back to the village. It smells of anger there. Here it smells of smoke and porridge and something I've forgotten. Safety. Una slept by the hearth, curled up in a ball. Her tail covered her nose. Lyra lay on her side of the bed, closer to Dan than yesterday, just a palm's width. The knife was in her hand, but her fingers on the handle were relaxed, not clenched. The system flickered. Day 4, 361 until the deadline, 26 days until the tax. The house felt cramped, dirty, cold in the corners, but for the first time in 4 days, it wasn't empty.
The 6th day began with rain, light, cold, the kind that seeped under his clothes and wore down his patience like a file. Dan woke up early. Mayhee was already sitting by the hearth, sorting through the herbs in her basket. She hadn't left. Not on the 5th day, not on the 6th. Every morning she said she'd leave today. Every evening she stayed. The subtext changed from day to day. On the 1st day, I need to check the wolf cub's wound. On the 2nd day, Yoon needs ointment for parasites. On the 3rd, just one more day. Dan didn't ask. He didn't pressure her. He waited. Lyra accepted her in silence. In wolf body language that meant, you can stay and I won't touch you, but if you harm the pack, I'll kill you. By pack, called the house on the hill pack. For the first time Dan noticed. The system noticed too. Lyra's trust scale, 18, 20. The threshold. At 20, she begins to defend Dan with her words. 20. The threshold has been crossed. On the 6th day, Dan decided it was time to deal with the tax. 24 days until the harvest tax collection. He sat by the hearth and thought aloud. Una sat next to him, nibbling on a piece of dry bread and listening. The village had to deliver grain to the Baron in 24 days. There was no grain. The 3rd crop failure in a row. Every time there isn't enough grain, the village goes out to raid the beastmen. The beastmen have to turn in hides to their chieftains. There aren't enough hides, so they go out to raid humans. A vicious cycle. Una stopped chewing. Subtext. He's thinking out loud. That's interesting. Usually adults don't think out loud in front of me. Usually adults don't think at all. Dan continued. The question isn't how to harvest the grain. The question is where it's going. Who is this Baron? Why hasn't anyone seen him in 20 years? And why do taxes rise every year while the roads aren't repaired, bridges aren't built, and the garrison that's supposed to protect the village hasn't come to the rescue even once in 10 years? Una said. Baron Alvertis. He lives in a castle beyond the pass, a 2-day journey, but no one goes there. They say he has a personal guard of 40 swordsmen. And they also say he buys beastmen hides through middlemen and sells them to people as hunting trophies. Dan looked at her. How do you know that? Una shrugged. I lived in the forest for 3 years. The forest hears everything. Caravan drivers talk by the campfire. They think there's no one in the forest. Implied meaning. I'm small. People don't notice me. That's my main skill, being invisible. Dan nodded. You're a scout. Una straightened up. Her ears pricked up. Subtext. He said scout, not thief, not a beggar, not a wild child. A scout. That word. Yes, I'm a scout. She said it out loud, and her voice wavered. Dan turned away. He gave her a second. Then he continued. I need the ledgers, any records of taxes, for as many years as there are. Who paid? How much? Where it went? Una thought. The village head has a chest in his house, wrought iron, with a lock. I saw it when I was sneaking in for food. There are papers in there. Dan looked at her for a long time. You can do it. Una bared her teeth. It wasn't aggression, it was a smile. Fox-like, predatory, playful, with a hidden meaning. Finally, someone's asking me to do what I do best.
She disappeared into the night. She returned before dawn, with a stack of crumpled papers tucked under her fur. Dirty, satisfied, ears pricked up, tail held high. I didn't unlock the chest. I removed the back panel of the chest. It was rotten on the inside, just like its owner. Dan took the papers, sat down by the light, began to read. The language was archaic, bureaucratic, but the system translated it. The numbers spoke louder than words. Over 3 years, Maple Glade had paid the Baron a tax equal to what 5 villages of that size should have paid. The numbers didn't add up. Gareth was overcharging the tax. He was pocketing the difference. But Gareth was also paying the Baron more than he should have. So the Baron was overcharging too. The chain went all the way up. Every level took its cut. At the bottom, there was hunger, and hunger turned into war. Dan spread the sheets out on the floor. Mayhee came over. She could read, a rarity in the village. Her mother was literate and had taught her. Mayhee looked at the numbers. Her reaction shifted. Surprise, anger. A quiet, growing anger. They're paying triple. The village is paying 3 times the required amount. Over 3 years, Dan nodded. And the difference? Gareth takes the difference, and he gives a portion to the Baron, for protection, for the fact that the Baron doesn't ask where the village gets so many casualties, for the fact that the Baron records the sold boys as having fallen in battle against the beasts. Mayhee clenched her fists. The paper crinkled. My brother is on those lists too. Dan looked at her. Check it. Mayhee began searching. Her finger slid along the lines. It stopped. So Tae-hyun, Hunter, 4th month casualties. Reason, killed in a clash with the beasts. Compensation paid, 2 silver. Mayhee looked up. 2 silver. They paid us 2 silver for his death. Mother cried and thanked the village head for at least the implication. 2 silver coins. That's the price. Not compensation. The price. They sold him. They sold my brother. Like livestock. For 2 silver coins. Dan remained silent. He saw the world that Mayhee had been building for 5 years crumble in her mind. A world in which her brother was a hero. A world in which beastmen were murderers. A world in which everything was simple and clear. That world was collapsing right now. And in its place, the truth was rising. Ugly. Dirty. Real. Mayhee stood up. She walked out of the house. Dan didn't follow her. He gave her time. Una flinched, about to follow, but Lyra stopped her, with a short growl. The implication, don't touch her. She needs to be alone. This isn't the kind of pain that words can heal. Mayhee returned an hour later.
Her eyes were red. Her face was calm, calm with that terrifying silence that would after everything has already been destroyed and it's time to rebuild. She sat down. She looked at Dan. "What do you want to do?" Dan replied, "Gather the elders, from both sides, on the hill. Show them these papers. Let them see who their real enemy is." Mayhe nodded. "The implication. Yes. Let them see." Mayhe's trust scale. He's trust scale. 38/45. Dan began to make plans. He needed to arrange a meeting that seemed impossible. Human elders and wolf leaders at the same table, on neutral ground. Problem number 1, the human elders won't go to the hill because there are beastmen there. Problem number 2, they won't go to the hill because there are humans there. Problem number 3,
Gareth will do everything in his power to prevent the meeting from happening. Problem number 4, Dan has neither authority, nor weapons, nor an army. He has a voice, papers, and one phrase from the system that he still hasn't found anyone to say it to. That melody you remember. It wasn't just your mother who sang it. Dan looked at Lyra. Lyra was sitting against the wall, sharpening her knife. With steady, practiced movements. Her face was calm, but the subtext flickered. He's about to do something crazy. Again, Dan turned to her. "I need your help." Lyra looked up. Subtext. He's asking, not ordering, asking. "I need you to go to your pack, to the leader, and give him an invitation to a meeting." Lyra stopped sharpening her knife. Subtext. He doesn't understand. "The pack banished me. If I show up on their territory, they have the right to kill me." Dan saw the subtext. I know it's dangerous, but you're the only one they'll even listen to before they kill you." Lyra looked at him. 5 seconds. 10. Then she said, "You're asking me to risk my life, for people who sold their own children, and for the pack that threw me away like trash." Dan replied, "I'm asking you to risk your life for 200 children in 2 villages who are innocent of any wrongdoing." Subtext. The truth. He's thinking about the children, not about himself, not about the world in a global sense, about specific children, the ones he saw at the wedding. That I understand. Lyra stood up. She put the knife away. "I'll go at dawn. If I'm not back by evening, then I won't be back." Subtext. I'm not afraid to die. I'm afraid to die for nothing. But for the children, that's not for nothing. Dan nodded. Lyra's trust scale. 20/24. Dan didn't sleep that night. He lay there listening to the rain on the thatched roof. Una was sniffling nearby. Mayhe breathed quietly by the wall. Lyra lay beside him, closer than ever. The knife wasn't in his hand. It was nearby, within arm's reach, but not in his hand. And Dan thought, that melody you remember? It wasn't just your mother who sang it. He looked at Lyra. Half-breed. A wolf for a mother. No, a lynx for a mother. Lyra was half lynx. Her mother was a lynx. A lullaby. A lynx lullaby. The one Lyra had heard as a child. And the one the system knew. Dan, quietly, almost soundlessly, began to hum. Not with words. A melody. The system suggested the notes. Simple, gentle, a lynx melody. The one mothers sing to their cubs when they're afraid of the dark. Lyra froze. Her whole body tensed. Dan could feel it right beside him. Every muscle, every nerve. He continued, quietly, slowly. 3 notes. 4, 5. Lyra turned toward him. Her eyes were open, wide. There was something in them that he had seen only twice in his life. In the eyes of a mother holding her child close, and in the eyes of a child who had found his mother. She spoke, in a whisper, in a language Dan hadn't known until that very moment, in the language of lynxes, and the system translated it. How do you know this song? That's how my mom used to sing, when I was scared in the dark. That's how my mom used to sing, before they killed her. The subtext, 10 years. I hadn't heard that melody in 10 years. I thought I'd forgotten it. I thought I'd lost the last thing left of her. And he, this strange, thin man, he knows it. How? Dan said, I didn't know this was your song. Someone told me. It's true. The system hadn't shut down.
Lyra looked at him, and for the first time in 10 years, tears streamed from her eyes. Silently, without sobs, just water. Lots of water. As if a dam had burst inside her, a dam she'd spent 10 years building out of pride, anger, and loneliness. She didn't look away. She didn't hide her face. She just lay there, crying and looking at him. And Dan didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't comfort her. He was just there. Because sometimes translation isn't about words. Sometimes translation is about presence. Ding! Word of the day, used, plus 20 points. Lyra's trust scale, D, 24. 41. A jump, the biggest ever. Language unlocked. Links basic. 3 out of 144 languages mastered. Lyra closed her eyes. Tears were still streaming down her face, but her breathing had evened out. She fell asleep. For the first time in 6 nights on the hill, she fell asleep without a knife in her hand. Dan lay beside her, staring at the ceiling. The system log flickered quietly. Day 6. 359 days until the end of the term. 24 days until the tax. 3 languages out of 144.
41 trust points with the she-wolf who had wanted to kill him 3 days ago. A small army consisting of the herbalist, the teenage fox, and his wife who had just fallen asleep beside him for the first time without a weapon. Somewhere down in the village, Gareth the Hammer was honing his hatred. Somewhere beyond the pass, Baron Olver Tiss was counting someone else's gold. Somewhere in the shadows sat those whose names no one knew. The silent table. And on the hill between 2 campfires, in a house with 4 walls and a single hearth, Dan Keir, the translator from another world, was building a bridge, 1 word at a time. At dawn on the 7th day, Lyra left. Dan stood in the doorway and watched as she descended the eastern slope toward the Silverbone River. Beyond the river lay the forest, the territory of the packs, the territory of those who had cast her aside like trash. She walked steadily, without looking back straight, tail low. In wolf body language, this meant, I come in peace, but I'm ready for a fight. Una stood next to Dan, ears pinned back, tail wrapped around her leg. She'll come back. The subtext, please, let her come back, please. Dan placed his hand on Una's head, between her ears. She'll come back. The subtext, I don't know, but I believe. The system hasn't failed, because faith isn't a lie. Faith is the truth for which there is no proof yet. He returned to the house. They had to prepare for the meeting. If Lyra brought the chief, if the chieftain didn't kill her first. Dan laid out the tax papers on a rock by the hearth. He helped sort them. She discovered another pattern. Every year, a week before tax collection, the village was raided by beastmen. Every year, without exception. 7 years in a row. The raid destroyed part of the... After the raid, Gareth would announce that there wasn't enough grain and that they had to go take some from the beasts. The village would go. They would plunder. They would return with their spoils. They would hand them over to the Baron. But here's what's strange. The raids always took place at night, always from the same direction, always without any human casualties.
only destruction. A burned-down granary, stolen grain, a smashed wagon. Mayhe said, "Raids without casualties. These aren't raids. It's a charade." Dan nodded.
Someone is staging these attacks to give Gareth a pretext for a counterattack. The question is, who? Mayhe looked at him. The implication? The Baron. The Baron is orchestrating these fake raids through Gareth, so the war wouldn't end, so the taxes would keep flowing. Dan saw her putting the pieces together, quickly, accurately. Mayhe was smarter than she wanted to appear, smarter than the village allowed her to be, a village where literate women were considered oddballs. Mayhe's trust scale, 45, 48. It rose every time Dan took her thoughts seriously. By noon, Una brought news. She'd run to the highway and overheard a conversation between two caravan drivers. The Baron's tax collector would be passing through the village in 3 days, with a guard, 4 horsemen, 1 scribe. They were coming to collect the tax early, 21 days early. Dan sat down. Early? Why? Una shrugged. The caravan drivers said the Baron was on edge. Something had happened at the wedding that he didn't like. Someone had spoken too much in 2 languages. Dan smirked. The Baron is on edge because of him. Because of the skinny guy on the hill who uttered a single phrase on the wedding clearing. That meant 2 things. First, the information reached the Baron in 6 days, so the Baron has eyes in the village, not just Gareth. Who else? Second, the Baron had decided to speed up the collection, to collect the tax before Dan had a chance to do anything. 3 days. He had 3 days instead of 24. Dan stood up. He paced around the house. 4 walls, 3 steps in each direction. Mayhe watched him. Una bit her nail. We need Cassian. Mayhe raised her eyebrows. The monk, Brother Cassian, a fat drunkard from the order who came to the wedding to eat bread and drink wine. Dan nodded. He's a monk of the Order of the Single Word. The order has a seal. Documents bearing the order's seal carry greater legal weight than the Baron's documents. If Cassian certifies our papers with the seal, the tax collector won't be able to ignore them. Mayhe shook her head. Why would a monk help us? He serves the order. The order serves the Baron. Dan recalled the wedding clearing. A fat man in a brown cassock, chewing on bread, with eyes red from wine, with a face on which fatigue lay like dust. 20 years of fatigue. The system had revealed his subtext at the wedding. Dan remembered. Another wedding, another death, another glass of wine to forget. God, I'm tired. Cassian Rowe, 34 years old, 20 years in the order, 20 years of silence, 20 years of guilt. He doesn't serve the order, he hides within it. Dan turned to Una. Find him. Una disappeared. 3 hours later she returned with news. Cassian was living in the guest house by the southern gate of Maple Valley. He'd been drinking since morning. He hadn't gone anywhere. He was supposed to have been recalled a month ago, but no order came from the order, so he stayed. Either they forgot, or they deliberately left him there to keep an eye on him. Dan went down to the village alone, without Lyra. She hadn't returned yet. Without Mayhe, her presence by his side was already raising questions in the village, alone, quietly, via the back path that Una had found. The guest house stood off the beaten path, dilapidated, with cloudy windows. Dan entered without knocking. Cassian was sitting at the table. A jug stood in front of him, half empty. His eyes were cloudy. His cassock was dirty. An open book lay on the table. Psalms, page 400, worn through from reading. Cassian looked up. He looked at Dan. The subtext? The boy from the wedding, alive. Interesting. I thought the she-wolf would eat him on the 3rd day. He said aloud, You're alive. Surprising. Dan sat down across from him. I'm alive, and I need help. Cassian's subtext. Help. For me. Help. I haven't helped anyone with anything in 20 years. For 20 years I've been sitting here, drinking, chewing bread, and pretending to serve a God I stopped believing in that night when... Dan saw the subtext cut off. A wall. Cassian knew how to hide his thoughts, not from the system, but from himself. He'd buried that memory so deep that it became just a word. That night.
No details, no faces, no smell of burnt flesh. Dan decided not to press the issue, not to pry. Instead, he took out the papers. He laid them in front of Cassian. Cassian looked at them for a long time. His cloudy eyes slowly cleared. He read the numbers. He turned the pages. His fingers were thick but precise. He knew how to read documents. The order had taught him that.
The Accounting of Sin. That's what they called it. Cassian finished reading. He set the jug aside. For the first time during the conversation, subtext, 17 guys, 2 silver ones, a 200% tax markup. Gareth was selling people. The Baron was covering for him. And me. I sat there and drank. 20 years. 20 years within a 5-minute walk of this village, and I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. He said aloud, "What do you want?" Dan replied, "Your seal. On these papers. The Baron's tax collector will arrive in 3 days. If I show him the documents without the seal, he'll burn them. If they bear the order's seal, he's obligated to accept them for review and report them to his superiors." Cassian shook his head. "My seal. Do you realize I'm not just putting myself at risk? The order. If the order finds out that I've certified documents against the interests of the Baron they're protecting..." He didn't finish. Dan finished for him. "They'll kill you." Cassian nodded. "Slowly. Or worse." Silence. Rain pounded on the roof. Cassian stared at the jug, then at the papers, then at his own hands. The subtext. 20 years. For 20 years, I've been drinking to forget that village, the children, the fire, the screams. The order gave the order. I obeyed. I stood there and watched. And ever since, every night. He looked up at Dan. "You know why I drink?" Dan shook his head. "No. Tell me." Not because he didn't see the subtext. He did. But subtext isn't a confession. A confession must be voluntary. Cassian spoke at length, quietly, monotonously, like a man who had carried a stone for 20 years and finally found a place to lay it down. 20 years ago, the order ordered the burning of a Beast People village on the border. The village had been accused of attacking a caravan. There was no attack. The caravan was a setup. They needed a pretext to clear the land for the Baron's pastures. There were children in the village. 14 children. Cassian stood within the cordon and watched. He didn't set it on fire. He didn't kill anyone. He just stood there. He watched. That was worse. He was done. His hands were shaking. The jug stood untouched. Dan was silent. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't condemn him. He listened. For the first time in 20 years, someone listened to Cassian without judgment, without excuses, just listened. Cassian's trust scale. 542. A jump, a huge one. 20 years of silence came crashing down in a single conversation. Cassian wiped his face. He looked at the papers. He picked up a pen. He opened the pouch on his belt. He took out a seal, a small one, bronze, bearing the emblem of the Order of the Single Word, and he stamped it on every sheet, silently, one by one, 7 sheets, 7 seals. Dan took the papers. He stood up. "Thank you." Cassian didn't reply. He sat there, staring at the empty table. The subtext. For the first time in 20 years, I'd done something. I don't know if it was the right thing, but something. Ding. Plus 15 points. Dan stepped out into the rain. He climbed the hill. Lyra was standing in the doorway of the house, alive, unharmed, with a gash on her cheekbone and blood on her right forearm, but she was standing there.
10 paces behind her, 3 were crouching, 2 young wolves and an old she-wolf with gray ears. Lyra said, "The leader didn't come, but his mother did, and 2 hunters, that's the best I could do." Subtext:
They beat me. They threw stones at me. They called me a half-breed. But old Riva, she remembers my mother. She's the only one who does. She came because I told her your name, and because the she-wolf by the stream told her about the herbalist who healed her daughter. Dan looked at the old she-wolf, Riva, mother of the pack leader. The system displayed the subtext. This person speaks wolf. I was told. I didn't believe it. Now I hear it. He speaks poorly, like a pup, but he speaks. It's been a long time, a very long time since anything like this happened. Dan bowed, in the wolf way, head down, neck exposed. Submission, respect. Riva twitched her ear slightly. Subtext: he knows our customs. Who's teaching him? A half-blood. A half-blood is teaching a human to be a wolf. The world has gone mad. Or is it finally recovering? Dan invited everyone into the house. A stone table, a fire, porridge, meat, Mahai's herbal tea. 9 beings sat at the table. Dan, Lyra, Yuna, Mahai, Riva, 2 young wolves. And later, Cassian arrived. Soaked from the rain, empty-handed, without a jug. For the first time, he walked in, saw the wolves, froze. Subtext: beastfolk. In the room, right there. I stood and watched as their homes burned 20 years ago, and now I'm sitting with them at the same table. Riva looked at him. Subtext: a man in a cassock. The order: those who burned our villages. My grandchildren died at your hands. But the boy said, give them a chance. One chance. The tension in the room was like a taut bowstring. Dan began to speak. He translated every word, from human to wolf, from wolf to human. He showed the papers. He explained the numbers. Riva listened. The young wolves listened. Mahai listened. Cassian listened to his own sins laid bare by a stranger's voice. 1 hour. 2. 3. Around midnight, Riva stood up. She looked at Dan. She said one sentence. In wolf. I'll tell the chief. The decision is his. But I'll tell him honestly. The subtext: I'm old. I'm tired of war. My grandchildren are dead. My great-grandchildren are starving. If this strange man is telling the truth, then the enemy isn't across the river. The enemy is up above. And we've all known this all along. We were just afraid to look up. She left. The wolves followed her. Quietly. Without saying goodbye. The wolf way. Jing. Plus 30 points. The trust scale. Riva. 0. 28. 2 days until the collector's arrival. Dan sat by the cold hearth. Mahai was asleep. Yuna was asleep. Cassian sat in the corner and, for the first time in 20 years, prayed, silently, with just his lips. Lyra approached. She sat down beside him, close, shoulder to shoulder. The collector arrived on the 9th day, sooner than expected, a day early. Yuna ran in from the road at dawn. 4 horsemen, one in a cloak bearing a coat of arms, a wagon. They'd be at the gate in an hour. Dan got up, got dressed, grabbed the papers. His hands were steady, his mind was clear. His body was letting him down. It was weak, hungry, and clumsy. But his body wasn't the main thing right now. He walked down the hill, alone. Lyra wanted to go with him. He asked her to stay. She saw the implication. If I come with the she-wolf, they won't listen to the papers. They'll be looking at her fangs. Lyra clenched her jaw, but she stayed. Maple Glade greeted him with silence. People stood by the houses, watching. After the incident with the 17 guys, the village had split. Half believed Gareth, half had their doubts. Those who doubted remained silent, but they stood closer to the square, waiting. Gareth stood at the gate, in a clean shirt, with the village headman's chain around his neck. Next to him were 3 burly guys with clubs, his personal guard. Gareth's subtext: the grain collector is coming. Fine, I'll give him the grain. He'll leave, and then I'll deal with the boy. At night. Quietly. The she-wolf is to blame. Everyone will believe it. Dan saw the plan. Clear, simple. Kill him and pin it on Lyra. The war will continue. Gareth will stay. The Baron will stay. Everything will stay the same. Dan stood off to the side.
Not at the gate, not in the crowd. On the porch of an empty house across from the square. He could see, he could hear, but he wasn't in the line of fire. The collector rode through the gate exactly 1 hour after Una's warning. 4 horsemen in leather armor, 1 scribe on a mare with a chest strapped to the saddle, and the collector himself. Tall, thin, with a face that looked as if it had been carved from stone and forgotten to be polished. A cloak bearing a coat of arms, the coat of arms of Baron Tiss. A shield with a crossed sword and quill. Dan read between the lines of the collector's words, "A hole. Just another hole. Collect the grain.
Record the figures. Leave before dark. I don't want to spend the night near the borderlands. Wolves. There are wolves everywhere here." A boring man, a bureaucrat, not a villain, just a cog in the machine. Gareth stepped forward. He bowed. He began to speak. Words. "We are pleased to welcome the envoy of the gracious Baron. This year's harvest is meager, but we've gathered all we could." Subtext. "I've gathered twice as much as needed. I'll give half to him. I'll keep half for myself. As always." Dan waited. He wasn't in a hurry. Let Gareth play out his part. The collector dismounted. The clerk opened his book. The procedure began. Sacks of grain were carried out of the barn. The clerk counted. He wrote it down. The collector stood and watched. A bored expression. The subtext. Not enough. Not enough, as always. The Baron will be dissatisfied. But the Baron is always dissatisfied. When the last sack was loaded onto the wagon, Dan stepped off the porch. He walked out onto the square. Quiet. Calm. He stood between the collector and the wagon. Gareth saw him first. Subtext. No, not now. Not here. Dan turned to the collector. His voice was steady. "Loud enough for the whole square to hear. I wish to file a formal complaint against the village head of Maple Paddy on 3 counts. First, overcharging taxes at 3 times the established rate for 3 years. Second, embezzlement of the difference. Third, selling villagers into mercenary service while falsifying the causes of their deaths." Silence. The square froze. The tax collector looked at Dan. The unspoken question, "Who is this? Why is he speaking? A complaint? I need a complaint about as much as I need a rock in my boot," he said aloud. "Who are you?" Dan took out the papers. He held them out. "Here are the documents. The village headman's ledgers, with the seal of the order of the single word." The word's seal had an effect. The collector took the papers. He looked at the seal. The undertone changed instantly. The order's seal. Genuine. A bronze impression. Not a forgery. If I ignore documents bearing the order's seal and it comes to light, I'll be hanged for disrespecting the church. The Baron won't save me. The Baron himself fears the order. He began to read. Slowly. His face was stony. But Dan saw the subtext. A triple tax. 17 sold off. 2 silver pieces per head. Staged raids. That village headman. That fat, bald village headman. He was stealing from the Baron too. No, the Baron knew. The Baron was getting his cut. This is more than I want to know. Garrett stepped forward. Lies. It's all lies. The boy's crazy. That creature from across the river has clouded his mind. Don't listen to him. Dan didn't turn to Gareth. He kept his eyes on the tax collector. Calm down. You can check every number. The ledgers are in the village headman's chest. Gareth's subtext exploded. The chest. How does he know about the chest? The back wall. Someone had removed the back wall. The fox. That red-haired creature. I saw her by the road. I should have. The tax collector folded the papers. He looked at Gareth. Subtext. I don't care if the boy is right or not. The order's seal. I'm obligated to report this. If I don't report it and this comes to light, I'm a dead man, he said aloud. I'll take the documents. I'll report to the Baron. It's up to him. Gareth opened his mouth. The collector raised his hand. Quiet, I said. It's up to the Baron. I turned to Dan. The subtext. Boy, you don't understand what you've done. The Baron won't investigate. The Baron will send soldiers, not for the village elder, for you. Dan understood. He knew the Baron wouldn't investigate. The Baron was involved more deeply than the village headman. The papers weren't a threat to Gareth. The papers were a threat to the Baron. And the Baron would respond in the only way feudal lords know how, with force. But the papers were now in the system, with the order's seal. The collector is required to register them. Even if the Baron destroys the copies, the registration will remain. And that was a thread. A thin one, but a thread nonetheless. The collector left, with the grain and the papers. Gareth stood at the gate and watched him go. The unspoken message, "I'll kill him, tonight, with my own hands." Dan turned around and walked toward the hill. His back burned under the elder's gaze. But no stones were thrown. The crowd stood and watched. And in that crowd, in the front row, was the woman whose son was on the list of 17. She wasn't looking at Dan. At Gareth, the subtext, 2 silver, my boy, 2 silver. The Maple Valley Public Trust Index, 1123, ding, plus 12 points. Dan climbed the hill, went into the house, sat down. His hands began to shake. Only now, when no one was watching, the adrenaline wore off and his body collapsed. Lyra was nearby. Subtext, he's shaking, but he's shaking afterward. Not during. During, he stood like a rock. That I understand. That's how warriors tremble. After the battle. Not before. She brought water, set it down beside him, didn't say a word. Una burst through the door. Gareth is gathering people. 6 men with clubs. They're coming this way. At night. Dan looked at Una, at Lyra, at Mayhe, who was standing against the wall, her face ashen. 6 of them, with clubs, against 1 skinny guy, 1 she-wolf, 1 teenage fox, and 1 herb girl. Good odds. Excellent. He laughed. Briefly, dryly. Mayhe looked at him as if he were crazy. Una flattened her ears. Lyra bared her teeth, but not maliciously. She understood his laugh. The subtext. He's laughing because he's not afraid. No, he is afraid. But he finds it funny that 6 men with sticks are going to kill a man just for telling the truth. He finds the world's stupidity funny. The night of the 9th day. The moon was hidden behind the clouds. The rain had stopped, but the air was damp and heavy. Dan sat by the hearth. He was waiting. Lyra stood by the door, ears pricked, listening. Mayhe returned with Cassian an hour before dark. Cassian was sober for the first time in a long while. His eyes were clear. His face was ashen with fear, but he walked steadily. He carried only one thing in his hands, a book of Psalms, page 400. He sat down in the corner. He didn't pray. He just held the book, like an anchor. Una hadn't returned by nightfall. Dan counted the minutes. Lyra counted the sounds. Then her ears twitched. They're coming. From the west. 6 of them. And someone else. More. Dan stepped out onto the porch. Darkness. Lights were rising from the western slope. Torches. Not 6. 12. Gareth had brought more people than he'd planned. 12 men with torches and clubs were climbing the slope toward the house on the hill. Dan felt his heart race. 12, not 6. He'd been off by half. Lyra stood beside him. Her fangs were bared. Her eyes glowed yellow in the glow of the distant torches. The implication. 12. That's a lot. But I can take down 3 before the rest get here. 4 if I'm lucky. Dan placed his hand on her shoulder. Quiet. She flinched at his touch, but she didn't pull away. No blood. If blood is spilled, we'll lose. Not a fight, but the truth. Lyra's subtext. He's touching me. His hand is warm, light, calloused. He isn't afraid of me. He's afraid for me. That's it. Something else. The tortures were getting closer. Gareth's voice, loud, confident.
Come out, half-breed! Come out and answer for your betrayal!
Dan stepped forward. He stood in front of the house, right in the circle of light cast by the torches the attackers were carrying. An open target. The plan was simple. If he stood in plain sight, Gareth would have to speak. And as long as Gareth was speaking, he wouldn't strike. And as long as he didn't strike, time was on Dan's side. Because Una was somewhere in the darkness, and Riva was somewhere across the river, and every minute of conversation was a minute closer to help. Gareth stepped out from behind his men. In his hand wasn't a club, it was an axe. A small one, a carpenter's axe, but it would do. The implication? A pup. He stands alone, unarmed, the she-wolf behind him. If I kill him in front of witnesses... No, they're my witnesses. My men.
They'll say he attacked first. They'll say the she-wolf lunged at me. Self-defense. Simple. Gareth began his speech to his men. This traitor brought beasts onto our land. He sold us out to our enemies. He has defiled our lineage by consorting with that creature. By the law of our ancestors, we have the right to a trial by fire. Dan listened. The system translated the subtext of each of the 12. Interesting. Of the 12, only 4 were convinced. 4 feared Gareth more than they believed him, and 4 came because they were promised a share of the loot. 8 out of the 12 didn't want to be here. Dan spoke up. Gareth, I see 12 men, 12 fathers and sons. Tell me, how many of them know where the 17 boys went? Silence. The subtext flickered. 2 out of 12. 2 knew. 1 was the cousin of one of the boys who'd been sold. He'd come with Gareth because Gareth had promised him that his brother was alive and would return if he kept quiet. This man's subtext was red hot. My brother. He said my brother is alive. He promised, if I help today, my brother will come back. It's true. It has to be true. Please. Dan looked straight at him. 3rd from the left. You. They're calling you. The system suggested a name from the subtext. Holland. Holland. Your brother is Merrick. He's on the list of 17. Gareth told you he's alive. The man named Holland flinched as if struck. Where are you from? Dan continued. Gareth is lying. Merrick won't be coming back. He was sold for 2 silver pieces, just like the other 16. The documents are with the Baron's collector, with the order's seal. Check for yourself. Holland turned toward Gareth, slowly. Subtext. No, he's lying. The kid's lying. Gareth. Gareth, tell me he's lying. Say it. Gareth wasn't looking at Holland, he was looking at Dan. The subtext. Where from? Where did he get the names? How does he know about Holland and Merrick? Who told him? Who? No one told him. The system told him. Garrett's subtext gave away everything it needed to. Names, connections, promises. Dan read people like an open book, and he didn't use what he read as a weapon, like a mirror. Holland lowered his club. Holland, how do you know? Gareth, you promised. You said Merrick was alive. Gareth barked. Shut up! Another voice among the 12. Quiet. Young. And my father? My father's on the list too. Gareth, you said the wolves killed him while he was hunting. One more, and the subtext of the 12 men with torches began to crumble, like a wall from which the keystone had been pulled out. Garrett felt it. He felt himself losing them. He did the only thing left for him to do. He lunged at Dan with an axe, quickly, without warning. The carpenter's axe came down from above. Dan saw the blow coming. His body reacted before his mind did. A step to the side, not a skill he'd learned, a bodily instinct. Dan Keir, the son of a drunkard, was a poor hunter. But he'd grown up in a village where people fought every day. Ducking the blow was a reflex. The axe whizzed past, a palm's width away. Gareth lurched forward out of momentum. He lost his balance, and at that moment, a growl rang out from the darkness behind the house. Not just one, many. The eastern slope came to life. Eyes, dozens of yellow eyes glowed in the darkness like embers. Riva had arrived, and she hadn't brought just 2 hunters, 12. They stood on the slope. They didn't move. They didn't attack. They just stood there and growled,
quietly, steadily, like an engine idling.
Just like back at the wedding, a wolf's silence. 12 men with torches froze. Their clubs hung limply at their sides. The unspoken message was the same. One word. Wolves. Gareth rose from his knees. He looked at the slope. He looked at Dan. He looked at his men. And he realized he had. Not the fight. The fight hadn't even started. He'd lost the moment. His men were no longer his. Half of them had already lowered their weapons. The other half were staring at the wolves and thinking of only one thing: how to get out of there alive. Dan stepped toward Gareth, close, within arm's reach. Gareth was holding an axe, but he didn't raise it. Dan spoke softly, just for him. "Gareth, I don't want to destroy you. I want you to stop destroying your village." Gareth's subtext: weakness. He's offering me a way out. I can do it. No. If I give in, the Baron will kill me. The Baron will kill my family. I can't. Dan saw it, and he understood what he hadn't understood before. Gareth wasn't a villain. Gareth was a hostage. The Baron held him just as he held the village, through fear, through threats, through a chain of sins that can't be broken without drowning. Dan said, "I know you're afraid of the Baron. I know he's holding you captive, but the papers are already with the collector. The train has left the station. You have 2 options. Keep going and fall with the Baron, or side with the village now while you still can." Gareth looked at him for a long time. Then he lowered the axe. He set it down on the ground. The subtext: "I'm tired. I'm tired of being afraid." 20 years, just like Cassian. Everyone was tired. Everyone was afraid. 20 years. Gareth turned to his men. His voice was hoarse. "Go home. It's all over." 12 men turned and walked down the slope. The torches receded. Darkness returned. On the eastern slope, eyes went out one by one. The wolves were leaving, quietly, without a goodbye. Gareth stood alone in the clearing, old, hunchbacked, without an axe. Subtext: "I sold out 17 boys. I burned down other people's homes. I lied to mothers for 20 years. And that skinny pup just gave me a chance I don't deserve. Why?" Gareth walked away, silently. Ding! Plus 60 points, public disarmament of the conflict. Maple Valley Public Trust Index, 2341. Cassian's Trust Index, 4275. Dan stood in front of the house. His legs wouldn't hold him. He sat right down on the ground. Lyra came over. She sat down beside him, quiet, shoulder to shoulder. They sat and watched as the last torches sank into the darkness below. Lyra said, quiet in wolfish, "You don't smell like food. You smell like home." Dan turned toward her. She was looking straight ahead. Her eyes were molten gold in the darkness. He opened his mouth to reply. And at that moment, the sound of a horn rang out from the road. Long, low, military. Lyra jumped to her feet, ears pricked. "That's not a village horn. It's an army horn." Una burst out of the darkness. "Horsemen, from the south, many of them. The Baron's coat of arms." He didn't wait for the scout's report. He's already on his way. Dan looked south. Distant lights on the highway. A column. Not just 4 horsemen. More. The system flickered quietly. "Attention. Military formation detected.
Estimated strength, 40 units. Weapons, swords, spears, crossbows. Commander, undetermined. 40 soldiers. Against 5. Dan closed his eyes, opened them, looked at Lyra, at Una, at Mei-He in the doorway, at Cassian with his book. 4 of them, and him. 5.
Against 40. Lyra stood beside him, fangs bared. The implication? I won't run away. I didn't run away from the trap when I was 7. I won't run away now. Dan nodded. We won't run. We'll face them. They arrived at dawn on the 10th day. 40 horsemen. The column stretched along the road like a steel snake. The morning sun glinted off the helmets and spearheads. Dan stood atop the hill and counted. 40. The system hadn't been wrong. At the head of the column rode a man on a raven black horse, a cloak bearing a coat of arms. Not a collector. Someone else. The subtext was too far away. The system couldn't read it at that distance. We needed to let him get closer. Everyone was standing nearby. Lyra, Una, Mei-He, Cassian. The 5 of them. At the top of the hill. Against 40. Dan turned to Cassian. You know who that is. Cassian squinted. He stared intently. Then he turned pale. Subtext. No, not him. Please, not him. Who? Duke Reynold, the Baron's right-hand man. The executioner. He's sent when the Baron wants nothing left. No people, no houses, no memories. Dan looked at the column. 40 soldiers and the executioner. After the papers that had already been taken away by the collector. The Baron panicked. He sent in the force. Don't ask questions. Wipe them out. The column stopped at the foot of the hill. The Duke dismounted, tall, broad-shouldered, his face hidden by a half-mask, a black cloak with silver trim. He raised his hand. The soldiers lined up in a semicircle at the base of the hill. They didn't move up. They waited for orders. The Duke began to climb alone, slowly, confidently, step by step. When he entered the system's range, Dan read the subtext. 5 of them. On the hill. 1 man, 1 she-wolf, 1 half-breed, 1 peasant woman, 1 defrocked priest. Ridiculous. They gave me 40 swords against 5 unarmed people. The Baron's a paranoid. But an order is an order. Burn down the house. Kill everyone. Blame it on an attack by beastmen. As usual. The Duke stopped 10 paces away from Dan. He took off his half-mask. His face was stern, weather-beaten. A scar ran from his left ear to his chin. His eyes were gray, cold, but the undertone didn't match his face. The undertone was weary. Another village, another order, another lie in the report. I'm 42 years old.
I'm tired, he said aloud.
In the name of Baron Olver Tiss, this house has been declared illegal. The occupants are to be detained and interrogated. Resistance is punishable by death. His voice was even, rehearsed. This wasn't the first time he'd spoken these words. Dan stepped forward, alone, unarmed, a skinny 23-year-old in a tattered shirt, facing a man in armor with a sword at his belt and 40 soldiers behind him. You've come to ruin the wedding. The Duke tilted his head slightly. The implication, a wedding? What wedding? Ah, the wedding of blood. Those 2. The young man and the she-wolf, the ones tied together with a rope. They're still alive. Amusing. Dan continued. But I have bad news for you. You're 200 years too late. The Duke blinked. Subtext. What? Dan spoke up, not to the Duke, to the soldiers, loudly, clearly, in a language everyone understood. Baron Tiss's soldiers. I know you were brought here to kill 5 unarmed people and burn down a single house. I know the report will say it was an attack by beastmen, just like they wrote about the village of Grey Willows 20 years ago. When the order burned 14 children and blamed it on the wolves. Cassian stepped forward. His hands were shaking. His face was gray, but his voice did not waver. I was there. I saw it. 14 children. I stood within the cordon. I've been silent for 20 years. I won't be any more. Silence. 40 soldiers looked up at the fat monk with a book of psalms, who was saying things that made you want to look away. The soldiers' subtext flickered. Dan read them, quickly, one by one. Gray willows. I'd heard about it. My father talked about it. He said it wasn't a war, it was a massacre. 14 children. I have 3 at home. That's not why I joined the army. Another order. Another village. How many more? The Duke turned to Dan. Subtext. He knows about the gray willows. How? The monk. The monk ratted us out. That changes everything. If the monk speaks out publicly, if word reaches the capital, reaches the supreme prior, he said it out loud. Shut up. Dan didn't shut up. He pulled the last sheet of paper from his breast pocket, a copy, the one Cassian had made before handing the originals to the collector. He had copied it by hand, every number, every name. With Cassian's new seal at the bottom. Here is a copy of the documents that have already left with your collector. Tax overcharges, the sale of people, fake raids, all bearing the order's seal. The originals are on their way to the chancery. If you burn us down here, the documents won't burn. They're already in the system. And every one of these 40 soldiers will become an accomplice. The Duke stared at the sheet. The subtext, a copy, with a seal. The originals are with the collector. The collector is already on his way. If I burn down the house, the papers won't burn. And these 40 idiots heard everything. They'll blab. Someone will snitch. Someone will remember. I can't kill 40 of my own men just to shut them up. The Baron won't understand. Or maybe he will, and he'll get rid of me next. Dan could see the gears turning in the Duke's head. Calculation. Pure, cold calculation. No morals, no emotions, only cost and benefit. And the cost had changed. Killing the 5 on the hill had become more expensive than not killing them. The Duke turned to the soldiers. We're leaving. One of the soldiers protested, but it's the Baron's order. The Duke looked at him. The subtext.
Stupid brute.
The Baron ordered a cleanup, but the Baron didn't know the monk would speak up, that the papers had already been sent, that I'd have to kill 40 of my own after 5 strangers so there would be no witnesses left. I'm an executioner, not a suicide. He said it out loud. I said it. We're leaving. I'll report to the Baron personally. He turned around. He walked downstairs. The soldiers exchanged glances, then, one by one, they began to turn their horses around. Slowly, some reluctantly, others with relief. Half the unspoken thoughts were the same. Thank God, we don't have to kill anyone today. The column was gone. The dust settled. The road was empty. 5 remained on the hill. Dan sat down on the ground. For the second time in 2 days, his legs gave out after the tension had subsided. Lyra sat down beside him, closer than ever, thigh to thigh, warm. Dan could feel the heat of her body through his clothes. She turned her head toward him. Her eyes were closed, molten gold. The subtext? He'd gone up against 40 of them alone, unarmed, and he'd won. Not by force, with words. I've seen pack leaders win battles with their teeth, their claws, their blood. I've never seen anyone win like this, with their voice, with the truth. I don't know what this is, but to me, he smells like home. She said aloud, quietly, in wolf speak. You did the impossible. Dan turned toward her. Their faces were close, closer than they'd been in 10 days. He could see every silvery hair on her cheekbones, every crack in her weather-beaten lips, the golden eyes in which he was drowning. He opened his mouth. He wanted to say something, anything. That she was beautiful when she wasn't trying to kill him,
that he was glad the system had chosen her, that the lynx lullaby was the most important song he'd ever sung. But he didn't get the chance. "Una!" She burst in between them. Literally, physically. She fell to her knees, tail bristling, ears pinned back, eyes wild. Dan! Dan! I remembered the face!" Dan pulled away from Lyra. What a face! When Riva was singing, at night, when the wolves were standing on the hillside, Riva sang softly, an old song. "And I remembered the face of that man whom I saw when I was 9, who came to our den at night, who took Mom away, who—" the implication, Mom, Mommy. "He took her away. He came with people in masks."
They spoke a language I didn't know. Mom was screaming, and he stood there, smiling, and I remember his face. I remember. Una was trembling all over, her tail lashed at the ground, with tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving trails in the mud. Dan hugged her, pulled her close. She clung to his shirt. Small, skinny, 17 years old. 3 years alone in the forest because someone took her mother. Someone whose face she had buried so deep in her memory that it took a lullaby to bring it back. Lyra stood beside her. She placed her hand on Una's back, between her shoulder blades, heavy, warm. Mayhe brought water. Cassian stood in the doorway and watched. The subtext, a little girl, yet another life shattered by a child. How many of them? How many more? When Una stopped trembling, Dan asked quietly, "Can you draw that face?" Una nodded. Dan gave her a piece of charcoal and a flat stone. She began to draw, slowly. Her hands were still trembling, line by line. The face emerged on the stone like a ghost. A man, not old, not young. Delicate features, a high forehead, narrow eyes, a straight nose, thin lips, a smile. Even in the drawing, the smile looked wrong.
Like a mask worn over another mask, Una finished. She put down the charcoal. She looked at the drawing. It was him. Everyone gathered around. They looked. Cassian, Mayhe, Lyra, and Dan. Dan looked at the face carved into the stone, and he felt something strange, a sense of recognition. Not of this face, of a type. He'd seen faces like this in a past life. At negotiating tables. People who smiled when others were shouting, who spoke calmly while shots rang out around them, who never raised their voices because they didn't need to. Others shouted for them. The silent table. Una drew the face of one of those who had kept the war going for 200 years. Jin. Plus 20 points. Event. First contact with Level 4. The silent table. Detected the visual profile of one of the 7. Information recorded. 20 points. For the drawing on the stone. For the memory of the girl who ate mice in the forest for 3 years. For the face of the man who smiled as he took her mother away. Day 10. 355 days until the deadline. The Baron has retreated, temporarily. Gareth is broken, temporarily.
The village is silent.
On the 11th day, a woman came to the hill who wanted to kill him. Dan was sitting by the hearth, repairing the roof, or rather, trying to. The thatch had sprung a leak, and rain was dripping right onto the bed. Dan's hands were too weak for this work. Una was helping. Mayhe was preparing a decoction. Lyra had gone hunting. Cassian sat by the wall reading psalms. Sober. His third day sober. You could tell by his hands. They trembled slightly and constantly. But he hadn't been drinking. Una was the first to hear it. Someone was coming. From the south. A person. Heavy footsteps. Angry. Dan went outside. A girl was climbing up the trail. Tall. Broad-shouldered for a woman. Dark hair cut short. She was wearing men's traveling clothes. Knee-high boots. A chest on her back. Heavy. She carried it as if it were a feather. Her hands were strong. The hands of a craftsman. Or a craftsman's daughter. Subtext. This hill. This house. This is where the one who wants peace with the beasts lives. The one because of whom my father hasn't slept for 3 nights. The one because of whom orders for weapons have dropped by half in a week. 1 week. And my father is already screaming that we'll go bankrupt, that they've ruined him, that he must be stopped. Hannah Thorne, 24 years old, the gunsmith's daughter. Dan read that between the lines. And he read more. She has a knife tucked into her belt, not a kitchen knife, a combat knife, with a riveted handle, her father's handiwork. She came to kill. Dan stood in the doorway. He watched. Hannah stopped 5 steps away. She set down the chest. She straightened up. Subtext. He's skinny, really skinny. I thought he'd be different, bigger, more intimidating. He looks like an undernourished shepherd. He's the one who stopped 40 soldiers. This one. She said aloud, "You're Dan Kerr." Dan nodded. She said, "I'm Hannah Thorne. My father makes swords for the Baron. Because of you, he's losing everything." Subtext. Say something mean. Say, "I don't care about your father." Say that peace is more important than money. Say something right and cold so it'd be easier for me to hit you. Dan looked at her. He saw the subtext. He saw the knife at her belt. He saw her right hand slowly moving backward, toward the hilt. And he said, "You have a beautiful anger. Someone betrayed you very badly." Hannah froze. Her hand stopped halfway to the knife. Subtext. What? What did he say? Beautiful anger. Beautiful. No one has ever, not once in my life, no one has ever told me that I'm beautiful, in any sense. Not once. My father used to say I was like a boy, that it was a shame I wasn't born a son, that I was only any good at the anvil, that... Beautiful. He said beautiful. Her hand dropped. The knife stayed at her belt. Hannah looked at him. Her eyes were dry, hard, but something in them wavered, for a second, like a crack in a wall. Dan didn't press the issue. He didn't repeat himself. He just stood there, waiting. Hannah exhaled, sharply, as if after a blow. I need to think. Dan pointed toward the house. "Come in. There's porridge." Hannah's unspoken thought. Porridge. He's offering me porridge. I came here to kill him, and he's offering porridge. What's wrong with this man? She went inside. She saw Una. Una looked at her with interest, sniffed the air. It smells like iron and coal. A blacksmith. Mayhe moved over by the hearth. She made room. Cassian didn't even look up from his book. Hannah sat down. She took a bowl. She started eating. Subtext. The porridge is disgusting. But it's hot. And here, it's warm here. And no one's yelling. My father's always yelling. Every morning, every evening. He yells that I'm good for nothing. He yells that I don't work hard enough. He yells that there are no orders. It's quiet here. Here. Strange. Lyra returned from hunting an hour later. 2 rabbits and a partridge. She saw Hannah. Subtext: the newcomer. She smells of steel. Dangerous. No. She smells of tears that haven't been shed in a long time. Not dangerous. Broken. Lyra set her catch by the hearth. She looked at Dan. Subtext: you've taken someone in again. Dan shrugged slightly. Lyra snorted. It was becoming a ritual. By evening, Hannah was still in the house. She didn't reach for a knife. She didn't try to kill anyone. She sat in the corner and mended the hinge on the chest. Her hands moved automatically, out of habit. She took the tools out of the chest. There weren't any personal belongings in there. There were tools: a hammer, pliers, files, measuring rulers. She hadn't brought a dowry with her. She'd brought a workshop. The subtext: I don't know why I'm still here. I should have struck and left.
But he said, beautiful anger. And now, I can't leave. Because if I leave, I'll never know what he meant. Because no one, ever. Hannah's trust scale. -15. 0. A 15-point rise in a single day. From minus to 0. The knife was still in her belt, but her hand didn't reach for it. On the 12th day, Hannah stayed. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't announce it. She just went out to the stream that morning, washed her face, came back, and started fixing the door hinge that had been creaking since day 1. She fixed it in 20 minutes. Dan had been listening to that creak for 10 days. Hannah fixed it in 20 minutes. The subtext: I'll fix the door, then the roof, then the hearth. This house is falling apart. How did they even build it? Blindfolded monkeys could have done a better job. Una said, she's complaining about the house. That's a good sign. Dan smiled. On the 13th day, Hannah told her, not to Dan, to May-he, at night, when she thought everyone was asleep. Dan wasn't asleep. He heard. No subtext, just words. Quiet, in the dark. My father makes swords, the best in the borderlands. But he's not just a blacksmith. He's a supplier. For someone.
Someone big, I don't know who. He travels once a season. He comes back with gold, a lot of gold, more than he gets for the swords. I asked. He hit me. I stopped asking. May-he was silent. She was listening. When you came to this hill and started talking about peace, my father was scared. Really scared. Not anger, fear. He said that if peace came, those people would come for him. That they don't forgive those who become useless. He sent me to kill you, because he's afraid. Because he thinks that if you're gone, everything will go back to the way it was, and those people will leave him alone. May-he asked quietly, those people, who are they? Hannah paused. I don't know their names, but I know one thing. They have a seal, round, with 7 dots in a circle. My father hides letters with this seal in a secret compartment behind the anvil. Dan lay in the darkness and listened. 7 dots. 7 members of the silent table. Hannah's father is an arms dealer for those who have been waging war for 200 years. And Hannah had just said it out loud. Not to Dan, to May-he, because May-he hadn't asked. May-he was just sitting there, and that was enough. Ding, plus 15 points.
Hannah's trust scale, 0, 12. She stayed. On the 14th day, she asked Dan for permission to visit her father. To pick up something, Dan asked. What? Hannah looked at him. The subtext? The accounting records. The letters with 7 dots. I hate my father for what he's done to my life, but I don't want him killed. If I bring the letters here, maybe they can be used to keep him safe, so that, she said aloud. The documents. Dan nodded. Be careful. Hannah left. She returned 2 days later, with a bag. Inside the bag were scrolls, dozens of scrolls, with a round seal, 7 dots in a circle, correspondence between the silent table and an arms supplier on the borderlands, 10 years of orders, 20 years of shipments, 20 years of payments in gold that came from who knows where. Dan unrolled the first scroll. The system translated it. The language was strange, not archaic, not local, something else, something familiar. He read, and with every line, the sense of recognition grew. He knew this style. Dry, bureaucratic, emotionless.
Deliver a shipment of 120 units by the 4th lunar day. Payment upon delivery.
Penalties for late delivery. Coordinates of the handoff point. This wasn't a medieval language. It was a calque, a translation. Someone had written in another language and translated it into the local one. And Dan knew the original language. He had heard it every day, in his past life, through his headphones, at the negotiating table. It was business English, translated into the language of Terravale. Ding! Attention! Linguistic match detected. The language of the documents contains structural markers of earthly origin. Probability, 94%. Dan lowered the scroll. He looked at the system log. Earthly origin. Someone from Earth had written these orders. Someone from Earth had been supplying the borderlands with weapons for 20 years. Someone from Earth had been supporting the war in the world of Terravale. How? Why? And then his last memory surfaced. A conference room. A table. A window. 2 people across from him. Let's start with what unites us. And a bullet to the back of the head. Not a sniper. A hit. They took him out because he was close to something. To the network. To that very network. The one that operates in both worlds. The one that profits from war here and there. The silent table and its Earth-based clients are one and the same. Dan sat in silence. The scrolls lay before him. Lyra was asleep. Una was asleep. Mayhe was asleep. Hannah sat in the corner, sharpening her knife. Not for murder, out of habit. Cassian was praying. Day 14, 351 days until the end of the term. The 15th day on Wedding Hill. On the 15th day, a woman arrived in black robe. Dan knew she would come. The system had alerted him an hour earlier. A bearer of the Order of the Single Words Mark is approaching. Rank, observer. Threat level, undetermined. Dan stood at the threshold. He looked at the path. She was climbing the southern slope, straight, even, every step the same length, every movement precise, like someone who had been taught from childhood not to make any unnecessary gestures. A black robe, the hood pulled down over her shoulders. Her face was uncovered, young, 26, maybe 27, dark hair tied back in a ponytail, high cheekbones, thin lips, gray eyes, cold, 3 blades at her belt. 3, not 1, 3, short, medium, long. She was skilled with all of them. Dan could tell by the way she moved, low center of gravity, hips slightly turned out, ready to strike with every step. Cassandra Vale, Cass, an observer of the Order. She stopped 10 paces away. The subtext flashed into view. The house, 5 people inside, the she-wolf by the door, the half-breed on the roof, the herbalist by the hearth, the fat defrocked priest in the corner, and him, skinny, unarmed. He was the one who forced Duke Rennell to retreat. He was the one who broke Gareth. It's him. My order. The 90th day. If by the 90th day he begins to corrupt minds, kill him, she said aloud. Mandate of the Order of the Single Word. Observer Cassandra Vale. Order. Testimony of the blood wedding. Deadline. Until the end of the ritual year. Her voice was steady, like a blade. Dan looked at her. The subtext continued to flicker. Order. A real order. Not a testimony. Elimination. On the 90th day, if he becomes a problem, he's already become a problem. But the 90th day is still far off. 75 days. I have time. Time to observe. To figure out how he does it. To figure it out and report back. And then the order. Dan saw it all. She was an assassin. Sent to kill him in 75 days. And she was standing right in front of him, waiting to be invited inside. He could have refused, could have kicked her out, could have told the others, but the system showed more than just the order. It revealed subtext upon subtext. Deeper, another layer. I was handed over to the Order at age 7. My name was burned out of me. My real name, Cassia. My name is Cassia. But that name is forbidden. It doesn't exist. I don't exist. There is a tool. The Order's blade. Cassandra. That's not a name. It's a function. Dan stepped aside, cleared the way. Come in. Tea's on the table. Cass's subtext. Tea. He's offering me tea. I came to kill him in 75 days, and he's offering tea. Cass's trust scale. 1. 1 out of 100. The beginning. She walked in. Lyra was standing by the wall, her fangs slightly bared. Subtext. It smells of steel and blood. Old blood. She's killed. A lot. I don't like this. Una on the roof stopped breathing. She pressed her ears against the wall. Subtext. The Order. The Order burns people like me. Half-bloods. Mayhe turned pale. Cassian looked up from his book. He looked at Cass. Subtext. The Order sent an observer. So they know. They know I set the seal. They know I've spoken up. This is the end. My end. Hannah instinctively put her hand on the hammer. The tension in the house was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Dan sat down by the hearth, calmly. He poured tea into a mug. He set it on the stone in front of Cass. She stood there. She didn't sit down. She looked at the mug, then at Dan. I know why you're here. Drink your tea until the time comes. Cass's subtext? He knows. How? Where from? He knows about the order. And yet he's offering me tea. And yet he's letting me into the house. This is either a trap or he really isn't afraid. Not me, not death. He isn't afraid of the truth. She sat down, slowly, in the farthest corner, with her back to two walls, facing the door and everyone, her hand on the middle blade. She picked up the mug. She drank, without taking her eyes off Dan. Clink. Cass's trust scale. 1, 3, plus 2. For the tea. Dan didn't sleep that night. He lay there thinking. Cass was sleeping in her corner. No, she wasn't sleeping. She was lying there with her eyes open, in the dark. Dan could hear her breathing, steady, controlled. And a whisper, barely audible, one word, Kasha. She was whispering her real name in her sleep, a sleep that wasn't really there, because she wasn't asleep. She was just lying in the dark, telling herself who she really was, every night, for 20 years. Dan remembered. Over the next few days, Cass watched, silently, from the corner, like a cat. She followed Dan's every move. She jotted things down in a little notebook. Dan didn't interfere. He didn't hide. He did everything openly. He spoke with Lyra in wolf-speak. He translated for May. Hi! He listened to Yuna's intelligence reports. He made plans with Hannah. He read the scrolls with Cassian. Cass saw everything. And the subtext changed from day to day. On the 16th day, he's strange. On the 18th, he's unlike anyone I've ever known. On the 20th, he isn't mine. Not at all. Never. I checked. I watched. I caught him. He isn't lying. How is that possible? On the 25th day, Dan did something. Not for Cass, for Lyra. But Cass heard it. That evening, by the campfire, Lyra asked Dan about his past. For the first time in 25 days, she wasn't asking about the system, not about languages, not about subtext. She asked, "You were a different person, before this body. Who?" Dan answered, honestly, for the first time out loud, in full. He told her about the translator, about the earpieces, about the hot spots, about the bus with the children, about the lie that saved 30 lives, about how he still doesn't know if the right thing to do, about the system that forbids lying, about the paradox. His best deed in his past life was a lie. His new life is built on the prohibition against lying. He spoke for a long time, quietly, by the campfire. Lyra listened. Yuna listened. May-He listened. Hannah listened. Cassian listened. And Cass. Cass lay in her corner and listened. The subtext. He has doubts about himself, about what he did. He saved the children, and yet he has doubts. I killed on orders and never once had any doubts, not once in 20 years. But he doubts the rescue, because the rescue was a lie. Me, I don't understand this man, but I want to understand. For the first time in 20 years, I want to understand something, not to carry it out, to understand. Cass's trust scale. 3, 24. A spike. 21 points in one evening. For honesty,
for vulnerability.
For the fact that a grown man said out loud in front of everyone, "I don't know if I did the right thing," and didn't fall apart because of it. Ding, plus 10 points. The 40th day, a month and 10 days on the hill. The house has changed. Hannah repaired the roof. She built a shed for firewood. She reinforced the walls. She installed a second door. Mehi planted a garden of medicinal herbs. Yuna trod out a network of trails around the hill. Each one led to a lookout point. She knew who was coming down the road an hour before that person even saw the hill. Lyra hunted. Every day, she fed everyone. Cassian repaired books and taught Yuna to read. Cass sat in the corner and watched. But on the 38th day, she helped for the first time. Silently, without being asked. She sharpened every knife in the house. The job took 10 minutes. The blades became razor sharp. Subtext: their knives are dull. All of them. It's annoying. I'm not helping. I'm removing the irritant. On the 39th day, she helped again. She showed Yuna how to move silently. Yuna was fast but noisy. Cass, in half an hour, taught her 3 techniques. Subtext: Lisa makes as much noise as a herd of cows. If she gets caught because of the noise, it'll be my fault because I could have taught her but didn't. I don't help. All right, I'll help. On the 40th day, the crucial moment happened. In the evening, Dan was sitting by the fire, examining the scrolls from Hannah's chest. Cass approached. For the first time in 25 days, on her own, without asking, without being told, she approached and sat down next to him. She looked at the scrolls, at the seal with 7 dots. The subtext: 7 dots. I know that symbol. The order knows that symbol. I was told it's the seal of an old trading house, a defunct one that no longer exists. But if it's defunct, why is its seal on fresh documents? She said aloud. I know that symbol. Dan looked up. Cass continued. The order receives money from them, every quarter, through an intermediary. I'm not supposed to know this, but I saw Pryor's accounting records, once, by accident. 7 dots, the same ones. Dan looked at her. Subtext: she's betraying the order. Deliberately. She knows what she's doing. She's making a choice. Do you realize what you're telling me? Cass nodded. The subtext: yes, I realize it. I don't care. No, I do care. I'm scared. But 20 years. I'm 7. They take me away from my mother. They brand my name off. They give me a new one. A blade in my hand. A quote on my tongue. Kill in the name of the one. For 20 years I've been killing. For 20 years I've been a tool. And this man, this skinny, unarmed man, he's the first one who looked at me and didn't see a blade. He saw Kasia. He knows my name. My real one. I didn't tell him, but he knows. Cass's trust scale, 24, 38. Dan showed her Yuna's drawing, a face on a stone. Cass looked at it. The subtext exploded. Dan was reading, and every word fell like a stone into water. That face. I know that face. No, I don't know it. It looks like... No, it can't be. She looked up. Where did you get this portrait? Yuna drew it. From memory. She saw this man when she was 9. Cass stared at the drawing for a long time. The subtext fluttered like a trapped bird. No, this can't be. But the eyes, the forehead, the bridge of the nose. It's him. No. She stood up, left the house, quickly. Dan didn't follow her. He knew she needed time. Cass returned an hour later. Her eyes were red. Her face was stony. The subtext. I checked. I compared it to what I remembered. The oval of the face, the distance between the eyes, the shape of the ears. It matches the man in the drawing. The only man with those features I'd ever seen in the order. In the Supreme Prior's chambers. A portrait on the wall. A caption at the bottom. Benefactor. No name is given. The portrait is 20 years old, but the face in Yuna's drawing is younger. So it's the same man, 20 years later. He hasn't aged. Or perhaps he's aged differently. She sat down. She said one sentence. This man is connected to the order. That's all I know. Dan nodded. Ding. Plus 15 points. Cross verification. The silent table is connected to the order of the single word.
The information has been verified by 2 independent sources. Another piece of the puzzle. The table funds the order. The order protects the barons. The barons wage war. War feeds the table. A vicious cycle. 200 years. And somewhere at the center of this circle is a man whose face never ages, and whose documents reek of earthly English.
On the night of the 50th day, Cass broke her emblem, the bronze plaque bearing the order's eye, which had hung on a chain around her neck for 20 years. She took it off, set it on a stone, took Hannah's hammer, and struck it. Once. The bronze split in 2. The eye shattered. Everyone woke up at the sound. Lyra raised her head. Una jumped up. May-Hi opened her eyes. Hannah reached for the knife. Cassian stopped breathing. Cass stood over the shattered emblem. Her hands were shaking. The subtext. Everything. 20 years. It's over. I'm not Cassandra Vale. I'm Cassia. Just Cassia. And I don't belong to anyone anymore. She looked up. She looked at Dan. Her eyes were wet. For the first time in 20 years, you knew my name. From day one. Dan nodded. Cassia. She flinched, as if from a blow, or a touch. Cass's trust scale. 38. 50. The threshold. 50. At 50, it protects Dan by action. The 100th day. 3 months on the hill. The world around me was changing, slowly, painfully, like a river changing its course. 1 pebble at a time, 1 handful of sand at a time. The mothers came first, those very ones. The mothers of the 17 boys who'd been sold. After Gareth put down his axe, the village was silent for a week. Then it began to speak, quietly, in their homes, by the well, at the wash. The mothers spoke to one another, out loud for the first time. My son, 2 silver coins. Where is he? Is he alive? On the 60th day, 3 women climbed the hill, silently, with baskets. The baskets held bread, eggs, milk. They didn't come to Dan. They came to May-E, because May-He was one of them, a villager, a herbalist, and she was on the hill. So the hill wasn't scary. They sat by the hearth, drank tea. Lyra was in the house. She was silent, sitting in her corner, not hiding, just there. The 3 women looked at her. The unspoken meanings were the same. A beast girl, a she-wolf, an enemy. No, not an enemy. A girl, skinny, with sad eyes, sitting in the corner, quiet, doesn't lunge, doesn't growl, just sits there. One of the women, the mother of a boy named Will, said quietly, She's not like they said. Dan translated for Lyra. Lyra looked at the woman. She didn't say anything. The subtext, I don't know what they were saying, but I know that I too was told that people are all the same, evil, cruel, all of them. And this woman brought milk to the house where the she-wolf lives. The women left. They came back a week later, with others, 5 of them, then 8, then 12. The hill became a place, not a home, a place, where they came, where they listened, where Dan translated, not languages, people. The mother complained that her son wouldn't listen. Dan listened to the subtext in her son's words when he came. The boy wasn't rebelling. The boy was afraid they'd sell him off like those 17. Dan translated that fear into the mother's language. The mother hugged her son. The boy cried. Ding, +1. Every time. 1 point at a time. Small reconciliations. Drops. But a river flows drop by drop. On the 70th day, the beast people came. Not wolves. Foxes. 3 families from the East Bank. Una led them. She went into the forest. She talked. In fox. Dan unlocked the fox language on the 62nd day. The 4th language out of 144. The foxes were cautious. Quiet. They sniffed every corner. But they came. Because Una was half fox. Because Una said that on the hill, they don't beat people. They don't chase them away. They feed them. Dan translated between the foxes and the people. The first conversation between the 2 races beyond the walls of war. Not about peace, about the weather, about the harvest, about children who suffer from the same illnesses on both sides of the river. May-Hi gave the fox mother an ointment for a rash. The fox mother gave May-Hi a root that humans didn't know about, an antiseptic, more powerful than anything in May-Hi's basket. An exchange, the first exchange. Not weapons, not pelts, medicines. Gin, +10. Reconciliation of the families. On the 80th day, Dan brokered peace between the first 2 villages, Maple Glade and the wolf pack of Grey Glade. Not a grand peace treaty, just an agreement. No shooting, no burning, no looting, for 1 season. A trial period. Both sides signed it. the pack leader came in person, that very same gray-haired wolf from the wedding, the one who growled the oath, the one who deep down felt sorry for Lyra. He came up the hill and sat down at the table across from the new headman of Maple Hollow. Gareth had left, on his own. After that night, he packed his things and vanished. No one looked for him. They chose the blacksmith as the new chieftain, the very same one to whom Gareth owed money for horseshoes. A quiet man, honest. The subtext was as clear as a mountain spring. I just want my children to grow up without war. The two elders sat at the same table. Dan translated every word, every nuance. No, he kept the subtext to himself. He translated only the words, honestly, without distortion, because at that table, the subtext of both men said the same thing. I'm tired. My people are tired. Enough. Ding! Plus 100 points. Reconciliation of the villages. An event. The first in the borderlands in 200 years. On the 99th day, Cass was supposed to kill Dan. By order. The 91st day had passed. Cass was sitting by the hearth, teaching Una how to throw knives. The order had not been carried out. She hadn't sent a report. She hadn't sent one for 40 days. The order was silent. It was suspicious. Dan knew that the order's silence was more dangerous than its wrath. When the order is silent, it is thinking. When it thinks, it is planning. When it plans, someone dies. But now, the 100th day, the house on the hill was full. The 7 permanent members, Dan, Lyra, Una, Mahie, Hannah, Cassian, Cass. People came every day, and beast folk, sometimes at the same time. Dan translated, from morning till night. The language of the heart worked non-stop. 5 languages unlocked: human, wolf, lynx, fox, raven. A raven named Crack flew, and on the 85th day, he landed on the roof. He spoke. Dan replied. Crack stayed. He became the hill's postal service. The raven's subtext was straightforward. Food, warmth, interesting, I'll stay. The system flickered. 5 languages out of 144. 320 points accumulated. Enough for a new ability is available, Echo Memory, to hear a conversation that took place in this room a day ago, a week, a month, a year. Dan activated Echo Memory, and the world changed again. Echo Memory showed Dan the past of the house on the hill. He activated it at night, when everyone was asleep. He placed his palms on the earthen floor, closed his eyes, and heard voices, old, distant, like whispers from beneath the water. The first layer, a year ago, empty. The house stood empty. The second layer, 5 years ago, voices, 2 of them, a man and a woman, the previous blood-wedding couple. They were arguing, yelling, then silence, long, cold. They didn't kill each other, they just stopped talking. And one night, they left. Each went their separate ways. Third layer, 20 years ago. Other voices. Another couple. Another wedding. These were quieter. They were trying. Dan heard the men trying to learn words in the language of beasts. He heard the woman trying to eat boiled meat. They were trying. 93 days. On the 94th, people in masks came. At night, screams, the sound of blows, silence. They were killed. The ones who tried. Killed. Dan dug deeper. 40 years. 60. 100. Couples came and went. Every blood wedding. Every generation. Some killed each other. Some were killed from the outside. Not a single couple survived to the end of the year. Not a single one in 200 years, because they weren't allowed to. For 200 years, someone had made sure the wedding always ended in death, that the sign of the gods always pointed to war, that peace would never come. Dan dug deeper still. 200 years ago, the very first layer, and he heard a voice, pure, clear, not a growl, not a guttural murmur, different, familiar, English. Pure 21st century English. The voice spoke. The bridge is built. The ritual has begun. The first couple will be dead by dawn. The cycle will begin. Estimated payback period? 200 years minimum. 2 worlds, 1 mechanism. War as a business model, an investment in hatred, dividends in blood. Dan took his hands off the floor. He opened his eyes. He was shaking, not from the cold, from the realization. 200 years ago, someone from Earth came to this world, built a bridge between the races, not for peace, for war. The blood wedding was not a ritual of reconciliation. It was a mechanism of control. Each couple was a fuse. As long as the fuse burns, the war continues. As long as the war continues, money flows. In both worlds. And the language of the heart system. It was created as a response, as a weapon against this mechanism. By someone who saw what was happening and couldn't stop it any other way. By someone who waited 200 years for a vessel to appear, a translator, a person who hears not the words, but what lies hidden behind them. Dan stood up. He walked out onto the hill. The stars were overhead. Silence. Terravale slept. 200 days until the end of the year. 180 days since that night when he opened his eyes in a stranger's body. 5 languages, 7 friends, 1 pacified pair of villages, 1 portrait, 1 stack of scrolls, and 1 terrible truth. This world and his world are 1 system, 1 machine. War here feeds something there. Something there feeds war here. The silent table sits on both floors and moves between them via a staircase no one has seen in 200 years. He returned to the house, woke everyone up, sat down at the table, and told them. Everything. Echoes, voices, English. 200 years. The mechanism, the business model of war. Lyra listened in silence. Subtext. My mother, the last bridge queen. She was killed to start the war. Not by accident, not in battle. A contract killing, just like him. On Earth, the same way. In both worlds, the same way. Cass listened. Subtext. The order. My order. 200 years of serving not God, serving business. I killed for business. 20 years for business. Cassian listened. Didn't drink, didn't pray, just sat there with a stony face. Subtext. 14 children in the gray willows. For business. Hannah listened. Subtext. Father, my father, a supplier, 20 years. He knew. He always knew. Mayhe listened. Subtext. My brother, neither a hero nor a victim, a commodity. Una listened. Subtext. Mom, they took my mom away. That man from the drawing, he took her away. Why? Silence. Long. Heavy. Then Lyra stood up. She was calm. Frighteningly calm. With the kind of calm a she-wolf has before she pounces. She said, my mother was the bridge queen, the last one, the one who brought peace between the races. They killed her so the races would fight. I am her daughter. I am the heir. Subtext. I knew. Not everything, but I knew. Grandma told me before she died. That mom wasn't just a lynx in a wolf pack. That mom was a queen. That she was killed. That I am the last one. Lyra's trust scale, 83. She revealed her most closely guarded secret, freely, in front of everyone, because she trusted me. Ding, plus 30 points. Event, revelation of a hidden line of succession. Lyra Silverfang, heir to the throne of the United Pax. Confirmed. Dan looked at her, at the woman who 30 days ago had slept with a knife in her hand, who ate raw meat,
whom her own people called a half-breed with rotten blood, a queen, the heir to a world they destroyed to sell war. He said, we'll find them. Lyra nodded. And we'll tear them apart. Not kill them. We'll make them talk. Dan shook his head. No. We'll make them tell the truth. out loud, in front of everyone, in every language I know. Lyra's subtext: he doesn't want blood. He wants words, the truth. He believes that truth kills lies. I'm a she-wolf. I believe in teeth, but his way works. I've seen it. 40 soldiers turned away from his words. Gareth put down his axe at his words. I'll try his way. Cass stood up. She took the medium blade from her belt. She laid it on the table. I know where the staircase is. Between the worlds. In the Order's basement. Beneath the main temple. There's a door there. One that's never opened. Behind which there are guards. Always. Day and night. I've been there once. They wouldn't let me past the hallway, but I saw the door, and I saw who went in. A man with the face from the drawing. Silence. Then Dan nodded. So we know where to go. 200 days until the deadline. 200 days to assemble an army, not of swords, of words.
Of people and beastmen who are ready to listen, of the truth that's been hidden beneath the war for 200 years. And when that army is ready, Dan will knock on that door, and he'll say, let's start with what unites us. Day 365, 1 year. Exactly 1 year since that morning when Dan Kerr opened his eyes in a stranger's body on the dirt floor. Over the course of that year, he'd learned 12 languages out of 144. He'd brought peace to 5 villages and 3 packs. He opened the first school for translators in the borderlands. 4 students, Una, May He, a young she-wolf he'd treated during the first week, and the son of the woman who used to bring milk up the hill, a 14-year-old boy with a quiet voice and a keen memory. 12 languages, 4 students, 1 peaceful stretch of the borderlands from Maple Hollow to Raven Ford, 60 miles without a single shot fired, for the first time in 200 years. Baron Oliver Tiss fled. On the 120th day, when Hannah delivered copies of the scrolls with the 7 dots not only to the collector, but also to the Merchants' Guild of the nearest town, and yet another copy via crack, straight to the provincial duke's chancellery. The baron was summoned to court. He did not go. He gathered his gold, he mounted his horse, and vanished into the night. His castle stood empty. Duke Reynold, the baron's executioner, sheathed his sword on the 130th day. He came to the hill, alone, unarmed. He stood before Dan. The subtext: I'm tired. I'm 42. I killed on orders. I won't do it anymore. If you can give me a job that doesn't involve killing, I'll work. Dan gave him a job, guarding trade caravans between villages. The first caravan passed through the borderlands without an armed escort on the 150th day. Reynold rode ahead, unarmed. He was guarded by a pack of wolves and 1 man. The order of the single word had split. On the 200th day, the Supreme Prior sent a detachment for Cass, 10 paladins. She went out to meet them alone. She stood before 10 blades. She did not draw her weapon. She spoke, for 2 hours, about the Grey Willows, about the 14 children, about the money from the silent table, about the door in the temple's basement. 3 of the 10 left. They removed their insignia. They threw them to the ground. Of the remaining 7, 4 returned to the order with a news the prior didn't want to hear. 3 remained on the hill. Cass became the first paladin translator in the order's history. Not a blade of the single word, the voice of the 7 tongues. She came up with that title herself. Dan smiled when he heard it. On the 244th day, Una remembered everything. Not just the face and his name, his voice, the words he spoke when he took her mother away. Lyra sang her the Lynx lullaby every evening. that very one. The melody Dan sang that night on the 6th day, and on the 240th evening, Una froze in the middle of the song. Her eyes went glassy, and she spoke in the voice of a 9-year-old girl. He said, "This fox knows too many languages. Take her, she'll come in handy, she'll come in handy." My mom was screaming, and he was smiling, and speaking, not in our language, in another one. The one Dan speaks when he thinks no one is listening. English. The man in the drawing was speaking English. On the 365th day, Dan stood at the top of the hill and looked down. Both slopes were occupied. On the western slope stood people, Maple Glade, 2 neighboring villages, merchants from the highway, the blacksmith, the new village headman, 17's mother, the young men with spears who had wanted to kill him a year ago. On the eastern slope stood the beast people, the wolves of Gray Glade, the foxes of the eastern shore, a family of lynxes from the distant hills, crows in the trees. Between them stood a house, not that one, another one. Over the course of a year, Hannah had rebuilt it. 4 rooms, a sturdy roof, 2 doors, west and east, a symbol. Mahai had planted a garden, medicinal herbs from both banks, the first communal garden of the borderlands. Dan stood in front of the house. Everyone stood nearby. Lyra, to the right, shoulder to shoulder. She was different. Over the course of a year, the silvery fur on her forearms had grown thicker, brighter. Her eyes burned with a calm golden glow. Not wary, calm. Her own fang hung around her neck, torn out, on a thin cord. She'd taken it off a week ago, held it out to Dan. The implication, "This is my fang." That's what female wolves have. It's more than a word. It's the soul. Dan took it, put it on. Wore it. Lyra's scale of trust, 100. Cass stood to the left, without her habit, in simple traveling clothes, 3 blades at her belt, but next to them, a new object, a small book, a dictionary, 7 languages. She'd compiled it herself. Every evening, Cass's scale of trust, 100. She had given him her secret. Cassia Tiss, the illegitimate daughter of Baron Alver. She hadn't known this until the 200th day. Cassian had found a record in the Order's archives. He showed it to her. She cried. For the first time. For real. Not quietly, loudly, like a child taken from her mother at the age of 7. Because that's exactly what had happened. Una stood at the front of the group. Ears pricked, tail up. Chief Scout. Top student at the School of Translators. She had grown up in a year. Not physically. In her face. Her eyes had grown older, but not sadder. For the first time in 4 years, not sadder. Una's trust scale, 100. She called Dan and Lyra Mom and Dad, as a joke, but not entirely. Mahai stood next to Cassian, quiet, calm, her hands covered in green spots. She didn't return to the village, not once. The village came to her. She became the healer of the borderlands, the first healer to treat both sides. The trust scale, 100. She said one night, quietly, "For the first time in my life, I want to live not out of spite, but for a reason." Hannah stood with a sack on her shoulder. The Minister of Finance of Wedding Hill. She counted everything. Every coin. Every sack of grain. Every pelt. She built the world's economy. Literally. Trade between the villages brought in twice as much as war. She proved it with numbers. The trust scale, 100. She told Dan once, "You're the first person who saw in me not the son I never had." Cassian stood behind everyone else, fat, sober, 8 months without wine, a book of Psalms in his hands, the same one, page 400. But now he believed, not in the Order's God, in another, in the one he saw every day on this hill, in the God of small conversations, quiet translations, honest words. The trust scale, 100. 2 crowds stood on the slopes and looked up, at the 7, at the house, at the hill that a year ago had been a place of execution, but had become a meeting place. Dan stepped forward. He spoke, in 12 languages, one after another. The same phrase. A year ago I was tied to a post with a rope made of oxhide. A woman I didn't know was tied next to me. We were handed over to each other so that we might die. We didn't die. We translated. The crowd listened, each in their own language, each hearing their own version of the same words. Dan continued. The war lasted 200 years, not because we hate each other, but because someone up there decided that hatred was more profitable than peace. Someone we hadn't seen, someone we hadn't heard, someone who spoke a language none of us knew. Now we know, and now we hear. Silence. Both crowds, at the same time.
just like a year ago on the wedding clearing, only now the silence was different. Not shock, attention. Dan looked at Lyra. She nodded, stepped forward, began to speak. In wolf, in lynx, in fox. I am Lyra Silverfang, daughter of the last bridge queen. I was sent to the slaughter as a half-breed with rotten blood, but my husband, she stumbled. The implication, husband, for the first time out loud. My husband showed me that blood isn't rotten, only lies are, and the lies that have been fed by our hatred for 200 years end today.
The crowd of beastmen stirred. A wave of whispers swept through the crowd. The bridge queen, daughter, heiress. Old Riva stepped out of the ranks of the wolves. She dropped to her knees. In the language of wolf body language, this signified acknowledgement, submission, loyalty. The other wolves followed suit, one by one. The foxes flattened their ears, acknowledgement. The lynxes bowed their heads, acknowledgement. Lyra stood before her people, and she wept, silently, just like then, that night, when Dan sang her mother's song to her. Only now the tears were different, not from pain, but because she had finally been seen. Dan stood beside her, holding her hand, and looking at the door of the house, the west door, which was closed, which was now slowly opening, from the inside. Even though no one was inside, everyone was outside. The door opened. A man stood in the doorway. Dan recognized him, from Yuna's sketch, from her echo memory, from the sensation that traveled from the back of her neck down her spine, the very spot where the bullet had entered. Back then, in her past life, the man was wearing a coat, a dark one. Behind him, in the doorway, snow was falling. Upward, not downward. Upward. The flakes rose from the threshold to the lintel and vanished. The door between worlds. The staircase. Here, not in the Order's basement. Here, on the hill. It had always been here. The man stepped over the threshold. He looked at Dan. He smiled. That very same smile from the drawing. A mask over a mask. And he spoke. In pure 21st century English. Daniel Keir, did you really think you were killed by accident? The system went off. Ding, ding, ding. Earth origin carrier detected. 100% match. Linguistic profile. English. Dialect. Northeast coast. Education. Higher. Age of speech patterns. Does not match visual age. Discrepancy. Over 100 years. Dan stood before the man who had killed him in his past life. Who 200 years ago had killed Lyra's mother. Who had taken Yuna's mother. Who had financed the Order. Who had turned war into a business. Who had moved between worlds as easily as between rooms. Lyra stood beside him, fangs bared. Cass placed her hand on her blade. Yuna hid behind Hannah. Mayhe took Dan's hand. Cassian crossed himself. Sincerely, the man in the cloak looked at them. His smile didn't waver. The implication, 7 against me. Funny. For 200 years I've been taking out people like this, one by one, 2 at a time, easy. But 7? 7 who trust each other? That's what I didn't count on. Dan spoke, not in English, in all 12 languages at once. The system was running at full capacity. Every word sounded to each listener in their native language, to both crowds on the slopes, for wolves and foxes and lynxes and ravens, for humans, for everyone. I know who you are. I know what you've done. 200 years ago you came here and built a machine of hate. You killed the bridge queen so the bridge would collapse. You created the blood wedding so every generation would see hope die. You sold weapons to both sides. You bought furs and sold swords. You killed interpreters and burned villages. 200 years. And you did the same thing in my world, on my earth. The same wars, the same conflicts, the same hot spots that never go out because it's in someone's interest to keep them burning. The man in the cloak listened. His smile slowly faded. Subtext. He knows everything. Echo memory. He heard my voice from 200 years ago. He reads between the lines. He. The translator. The real one. The one forged over 200 years. A weapon against me. Against us. Against the table. He spoke. You don't understand the scale of it, Daniel. 2 worlds. 2 markets. War isn't cruelty. War is economics. Stable. Predictable. Controllable.
The world is chaotic. The world is unpredictable. The world kills more people than war because in the world people start to think, and thinking people are dangerous. Dan listened. The system translated every word into 12 languages. Both crowds heard it, each in their own. The man in the coat didn't know that. He thought he was speaking to Dan. He was speaking to everyone. And Dan didn't interrupt. He let him speak. Because that was what he had lived for this past year. Not the battle, not the victory, the translation. The most terrifying lie spoken honestly in front of everyone. The man spoke. About 2 worlds, about the network, about the 7 members of the table, about the staircase between the floors, about how it all worked. Proudly, confidently, like an investor at a presentation. Dan translated, silently. The system did everything. Every beast person and every human on the hillside heard every word.
About how they were being killed for profit, how their hatred was a commodity, how their children were expendable. When the man finished, silence fell. The deepest silence Dan had ever heard in his 2 lifetimes. Then Dan said one sentence, that very one, the one he hadn't finished when the bullet entered the back of his head. Let's start with what unites us. The man in the coat turned pale, because at that moment he heard it, a growl, quiet, steady, from all sides, from both slopes, humans and beastmen, together, in unison. One growl, one sound, directed at him. For the first time in 200 years, both sides hated the same thing, not each other, him. The man took a step back, toward the door, toward the snow rising upward, toward the staircase between worlds. Dan stepped forward. No, you're not leaving. You'll tell them, everyone, in every language. Why? Why 200 years? Why the children? Why the blood? You'll tell them honestly, here, now, in front of everyone. The man looked at the crowd, at hundreds of eyes, yellow, green, brown, blue, everyone, who was looking at him and waiting for an answer. The implication, them, all of them, together, impossible. For 200 years I'd been building a wall between them, and this skinny translator tore it down in a year, with his voice, with the truth, with honest words. Impossible. But there they stand, together, and they're looking at me. And I, for the first time in 150 years, feel that. Fear. It's fear. I'd forgotten what it felt like. The man opened his mouth and began to speak. Not in English, in the language of Terrawhale. Slowly, quietly, like a man who had remained silent about the most important things for 200 years, and finally broke down. He spoke of the network, of the 7 names, of the door, about the mechanism, about money, about why, about how, about everything. Dan translated into every language, for every ear, every word. When the man finished, he stood there empty, drained. The subtext was quiet. Quiet for the first time in 150 years. That's it. I said everything. And the world didn't collapse. And I didn't die. I told the truth, and the world didn't collapse. That, unexpectedly. Dan stepped toward him, reached out his hand. The man looked at the hand, at the calloused fingers of the skinny guy, who a year ago had been bound by a wedding rope, who didn't know how to shoot a bow, who talked too much and too... He didn't take the hand. He turned around, stepped through the doorway, into the snow rising upward, and he vanished. The door closed. The snow stopped. The opening became an ordinary doorway. Beyond it was a room with a hearth and a stone table. Dan stood before the closed door, his hand outstretched, empty. He didn't take the hand, but he spoke the truth, in front of everyone, in every language, and that was enough. Because the truth had already been spoken, everyone had heard it, on both slopes, on both shores, and it could no longer be taken back. Lyra approached. She took his outstretched hand, squeezed it, warm, strong, clawed. He turned toward her, golden eyes, close, not just close, right next to him. She leaned in, touched his forehead with hers. In the language of wolves, this meant, "You are mine, I am yours, forever." Dan closed his eyes. The system flickered quietly. Lyra's trust scale, 100. Ding! Event. The first year of the blood wedding is complete. The couple is alive. The truce takes effect. For the first time in 200 years. The ritual cycle is broken. The mechanism is stopped. Attention, new target available. School of Translators. Expansion, 5 villages, 3 packs, 1 path. Medium-term objective, Embassy House. 12 languages out of 144, 132 to go. Final objective updated. Unseal the silent table. All 7 names, both sides of the staircase. Dan opened his eyes. He looked at the crowd, at both crowds, who were standing on the same hill, for the first time in 200 years, together, and he smiled. Not at the system, not at the crowd, at Lyra, who was holding his hand, who, a year ago, had wanted to eat him, who had become his home. He turned toward the house, toward his home. 4 rooms, a sturdy roof, 2 doors, west and east. Inside, a table waited, big enough for everyone. He went in first. Lyra followed him. Then Una, then Mayhe, then Hannah, then Cassian, then Cass. 7 at one table. A family. The first real family in the borderlands. Dan sat down. He looked at them, at each one, and he said, quietly, simply, in a language they all understood, "A year ago, I didn't finish one sentence. Today, I'll finish it. Let's start with what unites us." And they began.